What if Edward broke Bella's heart? Part 1. Bella took a long sip of her wine as her body tingled from the bath salts surrounding her. She'd never given much credence to the need for a long, luxurious bath after a hard day at work, but she'd never had one quite like the one that had just transpired. He was getting married. Edward was actually getting married. She cursed her own cowardice of the past 2 years of working with him. She had no one to blame but herself. There was no clause in their contract stating they couldn't date. Hell, half the office was dating one another. He was dating one of their co-workers. It wouldn't have been hard for Bella to ask him out to dinner one night after work or something. However, the fact was she never did, and now, it was too late. He was officially off the market with the announcement by their boss that morning of his engagement to Kate. She was happy for him. No, that was a lie. She was miserable, but she really was attempting to be the bigger person. If he was happy, she should try to be happy for him. Even if it felt like she was dying a little inside. Maybe she's pregnant and he's being forced to. Maybe he really does love her. That makes no sense. I mean really, she's just so plain. And he's so Edward. Yeah, she's definitely pregnant. She really has been looking a little fuller lately. Bella raced through the outer office and into her own, closing the door behind her, not wanting to hear any more of the gossip going around about Edward's engagement. No one in that place could ever just take things at face value and accept them for what it was. There always had to be some hidden purpose, something to fill their otherwise dull days at the expense of someone else. More than anything, Bella had to hide away before anyone caught the hint of tears in her eyes. How would she explain that? She's jealous of another woman having everything she wanted herself, all because Kate took the initiative to reach out and grab hold of it? She'd fallen in love with someone that was in love with someone else? That it stabbed at her heart to hear them talking about Kate that way, because she could only imagine that it was exactly what they would be saying about her if she'd ever been bold enough to follow her heart's desire. It was ridiculous and selfish to think that way, especially if the suggestion of their conversation was true. Maybe Kate was pregnant, having Edward's baby, becoming a family. Bella was gasping for breath as her thoughts raced through her mind. This is stupid, so fucking pathetic. Pull yourself together, Bella. You only have yourself to blame for this. A soft knock sounded at the door and vibrated through the wood to her back, and she reached over to tug the blinds closed on the office window. She needed to collect herself before she could risk anyone outside seeing her. She dabbed her fingertips under her eyes and smoothed her hands over her hair, but it all proved to be in vain. Bella, I know you're in there. We need to talk. Edward's soft voice came through and sent her heart racing, and she crumpled to the floor. Bella, are you alright? She heard him speak again, and used the doorknob for leverage to pull herself back up. Bella took a deep breath and placed a smile on her face after wiping at her eyes again and opened the door to look at him. Hi, Edward. Yes, I'm fine. Just tripped over the chair. Clumsy me. Edward's eyebrows rose, most likely at the obviously fake tenor of her voice, as well as the closest chair in the room being over by her desk. There's a rumor going around that you're avoiding me. What? Bella answered with a forced laugh, shaking her head. I've never heard such a crazy story. Where would anyone get that idea? Edward stepped into her office and closed the door behind him, leaning back against it with folded arms. His gaze was piercing, and she felt it radiate straight through her, as if he was looking for something. Even his stance was slightly intimidating, as his head tilted slowly to one side. Where to begin? You haven't said a single word to me since my engagement was announced yesterday, even though we were supposed to be working together on our project, perhaps? Or that you couldn't get past me quick enough this morning, even when I was calling for you. And then, of course, there was that little case of closing your blinds when I knocked on your door. I don't know, Bella. What is there in any of that? That would get tongues wagging around here. The sarcasm was clear by the end of his little speech, bringing a tiny smile to Bella's face. He hated the office gossip as much as she did, and it was nice that at least one thing hadn't changed. Sorry, I didn't hear you. And I wasn't feeling well last night, so I went home early, Bella replied, summoning everything within her to keep her voice from shaking. Yet, even to her own ears, her tone and words sounded choppy. Would he see right through her? Congratulations, by the way. That's really good news. You must be so excited. Oh, yeah. Can't wait to be a dad either, Edward said seriously. Bella ceased to breathe, her heart stilled in her chest, her eyes turned away from his, not wanting to see what might lie there, as she tried to force a smile and find the words to mask the way she truly felt, but she couldn't even fake it. She'd had plenty of opportunity in the past to make her move with Edward, work side by side with him on several projects over the years. It wasn't his fault that someone else had beat her to the punch, but that didn't ease the ache. However, confusion marred her features when he suddenly burst out laughing, and she gazed at him incredulously. Seriously, Bella, do you believe everything you hear? Gossip really is the root of all evil, and I thought you were more logical than that. You're a journalist, for crying out loud. That is the craziest story I've ever heard. I wouldn't marry a woman just because she was pregnant. That's very old-fashioned. People have babies all the time without ever getting married. Besides, Kate and I have never even shared the same bed together, let alone performed the required activity for such a joyous occasion to arise. She's not pregnant. Oh, well, that's good, Bella replied, and then gave a sharp inhale, as he gazed at her inquiringly. I mean, you're right. It would be a ridiculous reason to get married, if it was just because she was pregnant. You must really love her then. Edward drew in a slow, deep breath, with his eyes locked intensely on her, seemingly analyzing. Can I trust you, Bella? Of course. Why do you ask? Bella responded nervously as she observed all the mirth and lightness about him from only moments before disappear completely from his features. Edward, what's wrong? Sadly, I can't lie and say that it is like that, and I really wish that it could be. I never even wanted the formal announcement. It's a marriage of appearances, that's it. Edward exhaled and his head fell back, as if a huge weight had been lifted off his shoulders with that one statement. She needs me in order to receive her inheritance from her grandfather. There was a stipulation in the will that she had to be married, or else wait until she was 35 to receive it. The solution seemed obvious. Bella raised her eyebrow at him, and was actually waiting for him to resume laughing. He had to be pulling her leg again, but there was not even a hint of teasing in his eyes. Her eyes darkened with a flash of anger, stunning him momentarily before she began to speak. And the idea of getting married because she was pregnant was old-fashioned? Seriously? Wow, my whole view on you just changed completely. It was Edward's turn to be stunned by the sudden outburst of the woman before him, as well as the narrowed look in her eyes. While she definitely had her passionate side, Bella has always been very quiet, quite complacent, and he'd never so much as heard her say one harsh word against anyone in the entire time they had been working together. But there was no doubt in his mind, with one look from her in that moment, that she was pissed. What? You're unbelievable. Honestly and sincerely unfreaking believable. And here I thought you were different, but you're not. Boy, you really had me fooled. You're fake, just like those rich, socialite assholes you claim to detest so much. Marrying a woman just because she's having your spawn, that's unthinkable and so beneath you. But throw a few dollar signs at you, and you're racing to the altar. So is it the age-old plan? Marry for however long it takes to satisfy some terms of the will, and you walk away with a healthy paycheck in the divorce? God, I thought you were so nice, and so sweet, and so not them. I love that about you. Thank you for pointing out my horrible mistake. You deserve each other now. Bella, will you please keep your voice down? Edward rasped harshly, closing the distance between them and gazing down at her. You have no idea what you're talking about. It's pretty difficult to do anything like that with a prenup in place. That I asked for, in fact. Bella's eyes widened again, struck speechless by his words as he had seemed only moments ago by hers. Of any protest to her accusations that he could have made, she hadn't seen that one coming. But then why bother? Everyone knows that Kate is already well off and doesn't even have to work, so why not just wait the extra time? Or marry someone she actually loves, maybe? And what benefit do you get out of it? Because Kate will never see a goddamn dime any other way, Edward blurted out through clenched teeth, his hand falling from where it had risen to pinch the bridge of his nose, while Bella spoke. And this is why I need to know that I can trust you. Bella lowered herself into the chair beside her at the front of her desk, never taking her gaze off him for a second. I already said you could. Kate is in love with someone else, Edward replied simply. Okay, you're not helping me out at all here. So, why marry you? Why not this other guy? That would make a whole lot more sense, Bella asked, pressing her palm to her forehead. Because her name is Irina, and Kate's family is very religious. And I do mean more intense than anything I've ever seen in my entire life, Edward clarified, and watched Bella's hand lower to cover her mouth. If they find out before she receives her inheritance, they are powerful people and will find a way to cut her off from everything, not just her inheritance, and she'd be left with nothing. Even the sin of divorce isn't as harshly looked upon by them as her being in love with another woman. They would never forgive her. I see, Bella replied in a breathy voice. But what about you? It still doesn't explain how this benefits you at all. And you'll still have a divorce under your belt by the end of it all, too, won't you? In time, Edward replied and nodded, resting back against the edge of her desk with his arms crossed again. Kate and I have known each other for as long as either of us can remember. I think I knew before even she did that she was gay, as hard as that is to believe. But I never turned my back on her, and I never will. I may not be in love with Kate, but I do love her. I can't let her suffer because she loves the wrong person in her family's eyes, and Irina doesn't deserve it either. This money will give them the means to start over somewhere, and actually have a chance to be happy for once. That part isn't an enormous price to pay, and it's worth it if they can have that. Why are you telling me all this, Edward? He inhaled deeply and released it through his nose as he brought his eyes back to meet hers. Because I don't want you to think I'm this horrible person. I couldn't handle it if you did. And I have a question for you. Bella's eyes flickered in confusion over his face, his expression difficult to read. What's that? If you weren't the boss's daughter and I had asked you before, would I have even had a chance? Bella's chest felt as if it collapsed along with her breath, and she found it difficult to draw another one in as those words left his mouth. She had to be unconscious by the door or something from when she crumbled to it when he'd first knocked. There was no way any of this was real. Everything was too perfect, easily explained in such a way that Edward was not entirely beyond her grasp. But for him to ask a question such as that, she couldn't be anywhere but within a delirious illusion. What did you say? She asked in a whisper, her voice barely recognizable from the strain of her halted breath. Bella, you don't have to answer me, and I know it's really idiotic to ask now, and you can even get mad at me if you want, but something you just said has given me more reason to hope even if I took it out of context, Edward replied, and Bella gave him a brief shake of the head in confusion. All those qualities you pointed out, you said you loved about me. Just hearing you say those words, I can't describe it. I'm sorry if that makes you uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? No, Bella answered, pursing her lips and moving her head back and forth in disbelief. Mad? Oh, you damn well better believe I'm mad. I was a coward, I admit it. I was so damn nervous around you that, if we weren't working, I had no idea what the hell to say to you, or how to even talk to you. And your engagement has been publicly announced, and now, you're asking me if you would have had a chance before? What, now that you have a safety net, you think it's just a bit of harmless knowledge? Bella, it's not like that. You know that I could never do anything with the way things were. Your father would have my head, not to mention my job, if I so much as looked at you sideways. I can't lose my job, Edward replied, pleading with his eyes for Bella to understand. Well, then you have nothing to worry about because obviously, nothing can ever happen, for any reason. Now I have work to do, so if you'll excuse me, Mr. Cullen, Bella said dismissively and stood from the chair, making her way around her desk. Bella, Edward sighed as she leveled him with a glare as she settled in front of her computer and turned to leave the room without another word. The moment the door closed and she was completely alone, Bella let her head drop onto her folded arms and released the flood of tears that she'd been attempting to hold back since the day before. The pain in her chest was a sharp reminder that everything was real. He actually just said all those things, including the most heart-wrenching of all, would he have had a chance? That was by far the cruelest question he ever could have asked her, and she continued to agonize over it all day long and into the night once she went home. Why'd he have to say any of those things? Or worse still, appear just as tortured as she was as he walked out of her office that morning? That look on his face never left her mind's eye, nor did the look of hope only moments before. Damn you, Edward Cullen, she muttered under her breath at 2 o'clock in the morning, shoving the blankets off her and climbing out of bed. Bella walked right out to her car and started the engine, scrambling through her mind to remember the way to his house from the one time she'd had to drive him home after a happy hour at work. She knew she'd remembered correctly the moment she spotted that damn shiny Volvo he drove to work every day, and pulled in behind it. Storming her way up to his front door, she pounded on the thick wood and sent a resounding thump through it. But she didn't relent until she saw the windows from beside her illuminate. Edward appeared in front of her, his eyes still half closed and his hair disheveled from sleep, blinking several times while taking her in. "Bella, you had a chance. You had such a chance, despite my father or anything else. But it makes no difference now. Because regardless of the circumstances, you're getting married, Edward. I take this woman to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, for better or for worse kind of married, and I'm really trying to understand why you would do this to me. It's not fair. Because when you ask me something like that, it gives me reason to hope, only to tear it right back down again with reality." "Why, Edward?" Edward's face contorted as he listened, becoming more alert with every word she spoke, and running his eyes along her shivering form. Her cheeks were damp and bright pink, with tears streaming down them. She was only wearing a t-shirt and a thin pair of cotton pajama pants, and no jacket. The only thing covering her feet were fuzzy blue slippers, soaked through and covered in the slush from his driveway and front walk. "Bella, come in here." "No, I want to know why," she exclaimed through tight, chattering teeth. "And I will be more than glad to talk, but it's below freezing out here, you're soaking wet, and I'd hate to see you catch your death of pneumonia on my doorstep," Edward replied, gently taking hold of her upper arm, and the heat of his touch felt scalding to her, making her painfully aware of how cold she really was. Bella nodded and stepped over the threshold, the warmth of the interior causing her entire body to tremble violently. "Okay, I'm inside, and still soaking wet. I'll be right back," Edward stated and jogged upstairs, returning a moment later with a sweatshirt and night pants, and a thick pair of socks. "The bathroom is right over there." Bella only nodded and followed the direction in which he pointed, closing the door behind her, and slowly beginning to peel off her stiff frozen clothing. She inhaled the scent of him radiating off the pile of clothes she'd set on the toilet, and her throat began to close in on itself to restrain a sob. She was in his house, standing in his bathroom, would soon be wearing his clothes, but he still belonged to someone else. No matter how he explained or made sense of it, on paper, he would be Kate's husband, and nothing to her, which would have been a bit easier to take if he just could have kept those beautiful lips shut. When she made her way back out to the living room to find him, he stood as she entered. They remained motionless, staring at each other for several moments, until he finally let out a heavy breath. "Look, Bella, no, I don't need some lengthy explanation. Just tell me what I want to know," Bella cut him off, holding her hand up to stop him from continuing. "It really wasn't fair, what you did, so why?" Edward lowered back down to sit on the couch, gesturing with her eyes to do the same, which she did after a groan of frustration. "You had every reason to call me a coward." "Actually, I called myself a coward, Edward. I can read between the lines," Edward retorted and watched her eyes gaze intently at her folded hands. "I was very much a coward, and I regret that more than I can tell you. I thought you were so unreachable, I never took the chance. And now, I've made this promise to Kate, so I know it's too late. None of this is your fault, but when you wouldn't even look at me yesterday and this morning, it gutted me like nothing I've ever felt before. I had to tell you the truth, but I also needed to know if I'd missed out on something great. It wasn't meant to hurt you. I would never intentionally hurt you." Bella's eyes followed his movements as he leaned forward on his knees and drove his hands into his hair. That agonized look was back, and it was her turn to be gutted. She pulled her bent legs to her chest and hugged them close to her body. "Well, it obviously didn't help you much to know, and it certainly didn't help me. I'm sorry, Bella." "You have no idea how sorry," Edward replied, turning his head to look at her again. "I believe that," Bella said, far more calm now that she'd had the chance to see and talk to him. "But sorry doesn't change anything. You still have to go through with it." Edward nodded and leaned back, his eyes lifting to the ceiling. "Yes, I do. I can't go back on the promise I made to her." Bella pressed her lips together and slid her fingertips beneath his hand that lay by his leg. His shoulders stiffened with the sensation of her touch, and he quickly looked down as he closed his hold around them and then to her face. Her gaze remained lowered as she felt the warmth of his skin radiate through hers, and her heart pounded faster. "You said you would divorce, right?" "Yes," he replied, watching the trail of his thumb running over her knuckles. "It's just a matter of time, but it's inevitable. Otherwise it would be pointless, as she still wouldn't be free to be with Irina as she wishes to be." "How long do you have to be married?" Bella asked and waited for his eyes to meet hers. Edward inhaled deeply and rested his cheek against the back cushion of the couch. "As long as we can manage, but at least 2 years to satisfy the will." 2 years, Bella repeated in shock, and dropped her gaze. Wow, that's a long time. Bella, this marriage is going to be nothing more than a technicality. I'm not going to be expected to be faithful or anything else that comes along with a typical marriage, since she's obviously not going to be. If I really wanted to, I could even have a girlfriend as well, as long as I kept it secret until the end of my agreement with Kate, Edward said gently, but Bella's eyes widened nevertheless. Did I really just hear you right? Bella asked as her breath exhaled sharply from her chest and shook her head. You didn't really just ask me to have an affair with you, did you? When Edward's eyes lowered again and his own breath shook with the flush coloring his skin, she had her answer. No, Edward gasped, his eyes widening in response as he shook his head. Damn it. I just can't seem to keep my foot out of my mouth at all with you today, can I? Really, Bella, I'm not this gigantic asshole, as you probably see me right now. I never wanted to insult you that way. I'm sorry, just forget I said anything at all. Bella's gaze remained locked on Edward and she was visibly torn. Getting involved with another woman's husband was inherently wrong, even if there was nothing intimate about their relationship. It was more like a business arrangement than an actual marriage, but anything else would have to be kept a secret. She wouldn't be able to boast or even have the normal complaints about her man with her girlfriends, because in the eyes of the rest of the world she wouldn't even have one. Yet, she still couldn't stop her heart's automatic response of wanting him. Despite that, how did life get so screwed up and twisted? When did she become the immoral one? It's too late for that, Bella replied, shaking her head and her fingers squeezed gently around his hand. She really enjoyed the feel of his simple touch more than she ever should have, and she pulled it away slowly. I really don't know what to think right now. This isn't simple or clear-cut. I mean, the only way you could really have that girlfriend would be to sneak around, constantly having to look over your shoulder to make sure no one's watching, only being able to touch behind closed doors and drawn curtains, treating the marriage as if it is real in every way, and you're doing something wrong. Would that be something that you could live with? And all for a deception? How is it that no one has seen through it by now? You're a horrible liar, Edward, yet you fooled everyone, including my father. Edward watched her retract her hand from him and shook his head. It's not a lie to say that I love Kate, or that I'm marrying her. As long as I don't have to go into any more detail than that, I don't have a problem. But no, I'm not sure I could live with that. I'm really not that guy, and you deserve more than that. Bella sighed and closed her eyes, her exhaustion consuming her in a sudden rush. I should probably get home. How are you going to manage that with no shoes? Edward asked, smiling slightly as she glanced down at her socked feet. Take my bed, I'll sleep on the couch after I throw your things in the dryer. And if you want to leave first thing, I completely understand. I swear, you'll be safe. Bella contemplated for a moment, but she really didn't have the will to fight anymore for that day. It had been one constant strain since the moment she opened her eyes that morning, never relenting, and she really just wanted it to be over. She followed his directions to his bedroom, grateful that he didn't try to accompany her, even as far as the door. Not only was her body demanding sleep from her, but she also needed to clear her mind, which was next to impossible in his presence. She didn't want to think anymore that night. The situation with Edward would still be there to contemplate and hash out logically in the morning. Yet, as she collapsed onto the soft sheets, still heavily laced with his scent despite his absence, she began to fear that it might be a pointless endeavor. Bella's closed her eyes to will away her thoughts, startling as the beginnings of daylight met them when they reopened and she was lying on her back. Had she actually fallen asleep? The blankets covering her felt warmer than they had when she first climbed beneath them, as if she'd been there for a while. 3 cars passed in rapid succession outside, each of them splashing through the heavy puddles of slush along the sides of the road. However, everything else was eerily still and quiet. The clock on the nightstand read 6:30 and she groaned, rolling onto her stomach and burying her face into the pillow. His pillow. Bella lifted her head and gazed down at the dark blue fabric covering it. Events from the night before assaulting her. The only option she would have for the next 2 years, and still have what she wanted, was to be a secret lover on the side. His situation seemed so unbelievable, she began questioning in the back of her mind if any of it was true. Who did those kinds of things anymore, in the society in which they lived? The world had come a long way in its views, so why should his friend's sexual preference really matter that much? To the point that he would actually marry her. knowing the marriage would end before the vows were even exchanged. Whatever happened to the sanctity and value of marriage? However, the only thing keeping Bella from calling him an adulterous pig and walking away feeling the better for it was the fact that she knew Edward really was an extremely bad liar. With just the hint of deception, his face never failed to flush in blotches that she found adorable. There's even been a slight blush to his cheeks the day before, after teasing her about the rumors of him becoming a father. But there were no blotches the previous morning as he spoke of his marriage arrangement, no tremble in his speech or flicker of his eyes, nothing that would hint at the slightest hint of dishonesty. It was a really messed up situation that while it was of his own making, she had a difficult time determining what she would do if put in that same situation. Would she be able to tell a friend no and punish him for his family's beliefs? Bella slid out of the comfortable bed, instantly reaching for the bathrobe hanging there on the bedpost and wrapping it tightly around her body. Sorry, Edward, but your house is freezing. When she reached the living room, she found him still asleep, his long body stretched along the couch under a thin blanket. Just looking at him made her shiver, and not in the way it usually did. His knee was bent and leaning against the back of the couch, with the blanket fallen and gathered between his thighs, resting low on his waist. Both his feet were visible outside the covers, and his bare arms were also unprotected beyond the sleeveless shirt he wore. Wasn't he cold? Before she had time to think on it much more, he shifted in his sleep, and she crept silently through his house. As she turned the corner around the stairs, heading toward the bathroom, she saw her things, dry and folded on top of the counter by the sink. Setting her hand atop the pile, she spotted a note lying there with his handwriting scrawled neatly across it. I'm sorry, Bella. Please forgive me. Forgive me? Sure. For what exactly, might I ask? Dangling something in front of me that I can't have? Waiting until now to say anything to me at all? Ripping my heart out more than it already was? Bella muttered sarcastically under her breath hours later at her desk, drumming her fingers harshly on the keyboard of her laptop while her other hand propped up her head. I mean, it's not like you put me into an impossible situation or anything. Whatever happened to the good old hey, I like you, would you like to go out sometime? No, I get the complicated mess of I really want to be with you, but I've got this marriage bargain thing going on. Is that a problem? What the hell, universe? Miss Swan? A soft voice from the doorway followed a gentle knock, and Bella looked up to find the very last face she wanted to see in that moment. Kate. Are you alright? Bella sighed heavily and leaned back in her chair, avoiding the gaze of the woman standing there. It was obvious she'd heard her talking to herself, which was very uncharacteristic of her before the last couple of days. Edward really was driving her crazy. Yes, I'm fine, thank you. She scooted her chair toward her desk and gazed aimlessly at the computer screen, hoping that Kate would take the hint that she wanted to be left alone. Yet, obviously, she wasn't that observant, or else Bella hadn't been clear enough. The office door closed and she glanced up again to find the other woman standing across from her. Bella, can we talk? Bella, only her father and friends called her that, and Kate, she barely even knew in passing there at the office, and she didn't think she could mentally handle another talk within that room. She was still reeling from the last one. I'm really busy, Bella answered, trying to keep herself steady and her eyes focused on the screen. Kate settled into the seat across from her, and Bella's eyes widened in amazement. Really not one for subtlety, was she? Bella, I know what happened yesterday and last night. Edward might not be too skilled in using his brain before he speaks, but he's not the jerk you may think he is. Yeah, because he was showing it in spades yesterday. Bella bit back, still feeling a bit raw over the events of the previous day. Look, I know he's your friend and I can appreciate what you're trying to do here, but I can't talk about this right now. We need to, and we're not going to get another opportunity like this for a while, Kate replied insistently, and Bella's gaze met hers. Edward doesn't know I'm here. He was sent out on assignment this morning, and everyone else is out at lunch. This needs to be kept as private as possible. I don't want to embarrass him, and no one else can know about the other thing. Bella leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. So, it's true, then? You're marrying him for an inheritance? The money is really that important to steal away 2 years of his life and yours, more than taking advantage of someone you claim to care about? And what about the 2 other parties involved here? Me and Irina? You work, you have a place to live, and you have the means to take care of yourself. What is so damn important about that inheritance? It's not that simple. If it was, I never would have even thought about asking this of Edward. Irina and I want to have a baby, and obviously, that's a bit difficult given who we fell in love with. Kate said and saw Bella's jaw drop as the breath left her body, and immediately started shaking her head. As much as I adore Edward, no. Even if my preferences went that way, I've known him far too well for way too long. And as pretty as his babies might be someday, I would never do that to him, or the future mother of said babies. That's something far too sacred. And marriage isn't, Bella countered, her eyebrow quirked in question. If you want a baby so badly, there's always sperm donors. You're not the first lesbian couple to want a baby, you know. And why didn't he tell me this part? Because he didn't want to betray my trust any more than he already thought he was by telling you that I was gay. And yes, I do know that. But it's more complicated than that, Bella, Kate replied softly and shook her head. She's tried that, and it never takes. And her doctor has told her that the best option for her is in vitro. As I'm sure you know, the cost is high, and they don't exactly take payment plans for that. And nothing is guaranteed with it either. Well, excuse me for pointing out the obvious, but why don't you try? You do have that capability, Bella asked with a shrug. Again, there stands another complication. Aside from Edward and Irina, and now you, no one knows about me. I haven't even gone to a single doctor's appointment with her, so all they know is that she's trying to have a baby with a woman. I only met Irina by chance through church, and we both have to keep our sin a secret. Since we can't take a chance of someone seeing us out together, we don't do things that normal couples do. Even around those who would understand, because we can't risk it reaching our families. They will never accept us once they find out that we're not just roommates. Edward is all I have, the only one I've trusted with that secret. I've never been quite ready to come out to my family even though I know it's inevitable, Kate replied sadly, staring down at her hands. Irina is a lot stronger than I am, and is ready to take that leap whenever I am. She's gone through so much for me. But I need to tell them on my own terms, and I can't exactly explain to them that I'm pregnant without them asking how it happened. And when they find out I'm in love with a woman, they may go to church to ask God to forgive me, but they never will. So if Irina doesn't get pregnant, you have a scapegoat to explain your condition to your family? Bella retorted with a sarcastic laugh. Having a baby with him the traditional way is appalling to you, but you'll do this? Kate leaned back in her chair with an expression on her face that Bella couldn't quite decipher. And then a smile began tugging at her lips. I really thought he put you on a pedestal that was much too high. You always seemed so quiet and mousy, and I honestly couldn't understand what it was about you that spurred his interest. But now I can see exactly why Edward is in love with you. Bella's breath halted and her eyes widened as Kate spoke, and then began shaking her head. Edward is not in love with me. Maybe a work crush, nothing more. Otherwise, the fact that I was Charlie's daughter wouldn't have made any difference. I thought that at first, too, that it was just an infatuation that would pass, and he was just making up excuses about the boss-daughter thing, even though he really seems to believe it. But in the more than 20 years I've known Edward, I've never seen him the way he was this morning. He was a mess after he woke up and found you gone, and now it's very clear to me why, Kate said, leaning forward on Bella's desk. You're a good woman, with a very strong mind and opinions. But you're also very quick to jump to conclusions, Bella. I'm not going to ask Edward to play daddy to my baby. Once the inheritance is released, if Irina doesn't conceive after a few treatments, we will wait until after the divorce and I will try and tell my family. Bella held her head between her hands with her elbows resting on the desk. I'm sorry, but I still can't understand either one of you. Not completely. You want a baby, I get that. I can also understand that you're afraid to tell your family about everything. But you're going to have to eventually anyway, right? And to ask someone to do this for you, for your own ends, no matter how much I can sympathize with the desire for a child, is wrong. Especially if, as you claim, he has feelings for someone else, and you know it. What benefit is he getting out of this, aside from being a nice guy, a good friend, and helping you get everything you want? And him, waiting until now, when he's about to get married, to say a single word to me, no matter what. I am always going to be Charlie's daughter, so what was the point in saying this to me, if he never planned to do anything about it? And how could he consider marrying someone else for love or otherwise, while professing to care for me? Did you ever give him reason not to? Kate asked plainly, gazing at Bella with a crooked eyebrow. And what if he was marrying for love? Would you hate her too? Bella's eyes lifted to look at Kate, and let her hands fall. I don't hate you, Kate. Yes, you do. And it's understandable. "I'm marrying the man you love," Kate replied, and Bella shifted her gaze to the wall beside her, neither confirming nor denying the statement. "And you can't understand why he never said anything?" "I can. You can't tell me if I'm right or wrong, and you don't wear your emotions on your sleeve, even though I can see it plain as day now. But I'm a woman. You keep saying that he never told you, but you didn't tell him either, Bella. Edward couldn't figure out what you felt for him and was just as afraid of rejection as you seem to be. And now, you're both in pain, and for what?" "I can't be the other woman, Kate," Bella replied firmly, meeting the woman's eyes again. "I won't be the other woman. I want a man who's completely mine, that I don't have to share or sneak around with. Don't I deserve that?" "Of course you do. And it would be a very easy thing for you to acquire, if your heart didn't already belong to someone else," Kate answered and stood from the chair, smoothing down her skirt with her hands. "Despite what you might think, Edward means the world to me, and if I thought for 1 second that he would agree to it, I would walk away from this engagement. One of the best and worst qualities about Edward is that he's unfailingly loyal and a man of his word. But if you need someone to hate and blame for this, let it be me. I was the one who told him that he needed to know what you felt for him once and for all. Please, don't hate him." "I don't, but he didn't have to go through with it," Bella replied simply without elaborating anymore, and refocused her attention back on the computer screen as Kate made her way to the office door. Her shoulders only relaxed once she heard it click closed and a shuddering breath escaped her body. "This is really unfair," she thought as she rested her forehead on her folded arms with a soft groan. She wanted to wake up from this nightmare that seemed to be her life. The man she wanted was getting married, and it wasn't real. Because she wasn't an open book, he took her at face value and didn't even try. And as much as she hated to admit it, Kate was right. Bella was just as guilty in that, for never taking the chance herself either. Now the only choices she had left were to move on, wait for him for 2 long years, or to have everything she wanted, but in secret. None of the options particularly appealed to her. She wasn't sure her heart would ever truly move on from him. 2 years may as well have been forever to a 27-year-old woman who actually wanted to get married for the right reasons and have children. And as much as she loved him, she could admit that in her mind she couldn't and wouldn't share him. "Why is this so frustrating?" she growled between clenched teeth before sitting up abruptly, digging the heels of her palms into her eyes. "Seriously, what the hell, universe?" Bella spent the entire day after Kate left her office completely distracted from everything around her, in heavy contemplation of everything that was said. For every question answered, more arose. What had Kate thought would be accomplished by Edward confessing his feelings for Bella? And had she given any thought to how it would affect either of them if she felt anything in return? Was she really thinking of anyone but herself? And was Edward that blinded by his affection for his childhood friend, that he couldn't see it? Or was it Bella herself that had been blinded? She didn't want to believe the man she fell in love with didn't exist. It was so much easier on both her mind and her heart to think that he was just gullible, and his loyalty was severely misplaced. In Bella's mind, nothing, not even the fear of a closed-minded family or the desire to have a child, was worth the sacrifice of someone else's happiness. And knowing what could have been was supposed to do what? Make him feel better? Soothe him in any way? Or Bella, for that matter? It was all so confusing, and it only got worse when she spotted him walking by her office window when he returned around 3. He appeared drained, tired, and didn't even glance at her, but the increase of the tension in the set of his shoulders as he moved past told her that she hadn't gone unnoticed either. Bella wanted to talk to him, but wasn't sure exactly what to say. Kate had put them both into an impossible position, yet so had he by agreeing to it. There was no one blameless in the situation, even Bella herself. Even if Edward hadn't made his feelings known to her, she still could have gotten up the nerve to do it sooner, and then she could have told Kate exactly where to go with this faux dating marriage arrangement. Edward would be Bella's. She grabbed the stack of post-its off her desk and began scribbling a message on the top sheet. "Call me tonight." Ripping it off, she stood from her desk and made her way out of her office. As she moved toward his desk, her eyes scanned the area for anyone who might have been watching. Who would actually find this sort of thing exciting? The forbidden thrill that might entice some only served to make her shaky and nervous, and it was far from pleasant. After another quick glance around, she discreetly tossed the note in front of him and continued on to the break room to grab a cup of coffee. Her nerves were the only thing keeping her awake at that moment, after the short few hours of sleep she had the night before. That was until she saw him coming toward her on the way back to her office, and felt the brush of his hand on hers as he moved past. She shivered, but then her attention was drawn to the now crumpled post-it he'd pressed into her palm, crinkling as she closed her fist around it. She hid the raggedness of her breath behind taking a sip of coffee, and hastened her steps toward her office, settling into her chair, and unwrinkling the small sheet of paper. "Need a number for that," was scrawled neatly beneath her message, followed by his own. Bella rolled her eyes at herself. He'd only ever called her desk phone. Her cell was private, and few actually had that number. She was so closed off from everyone else, never going out of her way to make friends. How could anyone have really known what she was thinking or feeling when she didn't share that information with even the closest people to her? Knowing she was partially at fault did not take away from the anxiety of the situation, however. She quickly added his number to her phone before shredding the note into tiny pieces and watching them flutter into the trash can. Even as she typed out a reply, her stomach was coiling inside her and her head was spinning. This kind of thing definitely wasn't for her. Hiding, sneaking around, passing notes like a couple of children? It wasn't at all what she would ever want with Edward. "I'll be home by 7, she texted back to him, and returned her focus to work. Bella stared at her phone on the coffee table in front of her, waiting for it to ring, while her heart still pounded erratically in her chest. She wanted Edward more than any other man in her entire life, and because of their cowardice, she was charged with the task of letting him go. Once again, Kate had been right. A part of Bella did hate her, as irrational as it may have seemed at the time. She was using Edward for her own gain, no matter how anyone tried to make it appear otherwise, and it was killing Bella to sit back and watch. But it wasn't her job to save him from himself. Only he could do that. Her phone began to vibrate, doing its little dance on the tabletop, and she leaned forward to see Edward's name clearly displayed on the screen. She drew in a deep breath as she took it into her hand and answered, "Hello?" "Hi," Edward's soft voice came through, and Bella actually felt tears burning unbiddenly in her eyes. They were both silent for several agonizing moments until he let out a sigh. "Listen, Bella, I know you probably think I'm an idiot now." "Yes, I do," Bella interrupted bluntly, leaning back into her couch with a huff. "I'm failing to see the equality in all this. She gets everything: her girlfriend, her inheritance, her chance for a baby, and the time to prepare herself for telling her family. What do you get? 2 years of wearing the mask of a happily married man, alone. And what about afterward? She claims she doesn't want to embarrass you, but eventually, the truth about her and Irina is going to come out, and you'll become one of those men whose wives left them for another woman. You'll look like a fool, Edward, and for a lie." "I know. I've considered all that as well. It just didn't seem like that much of a sacrifice before now," Edward replied in a low tone. "Why did you have to wait? If what Kate said was true and you really feel that way for me, what the hell took you so long?" Bella asked, her curiosity flowing to the surface. "It was the biggest mistake I've made in my entire life, and it's not something I can take back or make right. I'm sorry." "Stop with the apologies and start with the explaining, Edward. I deserve that much, don't I?" Bella snapped, driving her free hand into her hair in frustration. "Yes, you do. I'm just not sure that any explanation is going to be adequate," Edward replied, his voice lowering even more. "Well, you've got the opportunity, so try me," Bella said as she closed her eyes. Edward nervously cleared his throat and exhaled a slow breath before he began. "You would have been worth losing my job over, if that was what it came down to. But I couldn't even get up the balls enough to approach you, not on a personal level. But you did. When it could hurt me the most, you did," Bella interrupted, shifting on the couch to lay her head down on the throw pillow there. "I honestly didn't think I would have a snowball's chance in hell of you feeling anything for me. You're beautiful, intelligent, could have your choice of any man you wanted. Why would I even be a blip on your radar?" Edward replied, and Bella felt a tear escape the corner of her eye, falling to the pillow beneath her. "And then you reacted that way when the engagement was announced, and it confused the hell out of me. And Kate told you to talk to me, even though it was obvious that the idea of you getting married bothered me." Bella cut him off again, her anger bubbling up inside her. "I really will never understand either of you. What the hell were you hoping to accomplish with all this? What did the idea of 2 years of impending loneliness get to you, so you finally decided to take a shot with me?" Edward sighed and was silent for a moment before beginning to speak again, his voice more firm than before. "I really don't know what I was hoping to accomplish, because I never factored this into the equation. I imagine everything from you letting me down easy to flat out laughing at the ridiculousness of it all, but not this. Bella draped her arm across her forehead and gazed up at the ceiling, listening as Edward's voice lost some of its ferocity at the end of his statement, and dropped to just above a whisper. She swallowed hard and mentally cursed the situation they were in, her chest aching with the thought, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I won't be a secret girlfriend on the side, and while even 2 years might be worth the wait for me, I want more than that. I need more than sitting on the sidelines, waiting for something that might never happen. No matter what you say now, anything could change in the matter of months, let alone a couple of years. I can't know that you'd still want me by then. I wouldn't change, Bella, but as I said before, you shouldn't have to pay the consequences for my decisions. I would never ask you to wait for me, Edward replied with a heavy exhale. But I already am paying the consequences, whether I should or not. Whatever the circumstances, she's getting everything I want, because I never had the courage to say anything before. I never thought I had a chance. She'll get to touch you when I can't, be with you when I can't, and none of it is real. And knowing that is more excruciating than it ever could have been before I knew the truth. Why you? Of all the men out there she could possibly choose from, why does it absolutely have to be you? Bella replied softly, attempting to disguise her sob behind a deep breath and curling her knees to her chest as she rolled onto her side. What choice does that leave either of us, Edward? Live like we're doing something wrong, or let each other go? I know she's your friend and I'm sorry, but this is completely selfish of her. She's gaining everything and sacrificing next to nothing. Aside from what she says would be gone anyway, once she came out to her family. Is that worth everything you'd lose? Is it more important than me? Bella, actually, don't answer that. I'm not sure I'd want to know either way. She halted his response, slowly swaying her head back and forth, if only for herself. She exhaled a short breath of a laugh, though the tears were still clear behind it. It's kinda weird, huh? Breaking up before we've even had the chance to really be together? Yeah, it is, Edward replied in a strained voice. Bella swallowed back another sob and exhaled slowly before she could respond. I guess I'll see you at work, then. See you at work, he answered as calmly as he could muster. And Edward? Bella said before he could disconnect, and he hummed in reply. I love you. And then she ended the call herself. I deserved that. Completely and thoroughly deserved that, Edward thought as he stared at the screen of his phone until it flickered out, severing the last remnant of the connection he had with Bella before he tossed the device onto his bedside table. How had he managed to make such a mess of his life? That much was easy to answer. He was a chicken shit. He'd let something potentially amazing slip through his fingers out of fear, with no real basis for it. His self-esteem and confidence were his greatest enemies. For 2 years, he's watched and admired Bella from a distance. She was all he heard, saw, and felt whenever she was near him, regardless of who else might have been around. Yet, she always seemed so detached from everything and everyone for the longest time. She was the most beautiful woman in the world in his eyes, as well as intelligent and clever, self-sufficient. Why would she look twice at him when she could find someone so much better, more worthy of a woman like her? And then there was the fact that she was the only child of Charlie Swan, and Edward was not the only man in the office to be stricken with a bit of fear over that aspect. It was never really vocalized, just assumed that the boss's daughter was off limits if you valued your job at all. Then they were assigned to work together on a story for a month the year before, and his mind had not stopped torturing him with his wants and desires ever since. Edward saw a whole new side to Bella Swan in those 4 weeks than he had before, and it did nothing to lessen her appeal to him. He found her so sweet and down to earth in that time, letting down her guard and actually having conversations with him, even if it was only work-related. For 9 hours every single day, he was in her presence, her voice and the soft scent of her perfume, both soothing him and setting every nerve in his body on edge simultaneously. When she would lean in behind him to read something over his shoulder, he warred with himself between pulling her closer, pushing her away, and of course, doing absolutely nothing. Edward had always opted for the last option, and Kate was constantly telling him what an idiot he was for doing so. She'd told him time and time again that he needed to take a shot with Bella, at the very least, ask her out to coffee. But he convinced himself that she was way out of his league, and once their assignment concluded, she retreated back to the same closed-off Bella from before. She had no other reason to be around him, so he just assumed that he was right when she made no effort to do so. She'd just walked away. But it was too late for Edward's heart. He was already hopelessly in love with her. No matter how many times they worked together, it always ended the same, and he continued to pine away for a woman beyond his reach. And now he felt as if his hands were bound, and that he was just as big of an idiot as Kate had always accused him of being when it came to Bella. The past 24 hours, since the moment he opened the door to find a freezing cold Bella in her pajamas on his doorstep, had been the most conflicted he'd ever felt in his life. The pain and heartbreak he heard in her voice and saw in her eyes as she answered the question he'd posed to her earlier that day was so deep, and it became clear what a fool he'd truly been. At that moment, he'd actually thought about calling Kate and telling her that he couldn't go through with it. He spent an hour after Bella went upstairs that night contemplating ways in which he could make both women happy, and as he was folding her clothes and setting them on the bathroom counter for her, he knew it was impossible. 4 lives hung in the balance of one decision, and ultimately, he had the ability to shatter one, two, or all of them. XXX. The tension between Edward and Bella was thick the day after their phone call, sharing only nods and brief smiles in greeting before heading to their respective desks. He was asked repeatedly all morning if he was all right, to which he would just shrug and claim that he was tired. It wasn't a complete lie. He'd barely gotten any sleep with her "I love you" ringing in his mind all night. He tried to keep his focus on his work, but then he would hear her voice or her office door open, and his eyes immediately locked on her. It was during one of those instances that he felt a tap on his shoulder, his head snapping up to be met with the face of Charlie Swan. "Shit, he's caught me ogling his daughter. Not good, especially when I'm engaged to another woman," Edward thought to himself, and visibly stiffened at his boss's next statement. "My office." With each step he took, he prepared himself for the inevitable termination he believed was coming his way, running over anything else in his mind that could be used as a valid reason. Had he made a mistake on the assignment the day before? Had Charlie noticed that he clocked in 10 minutes late the previous week, when he was distracted and forgot to do so as soon as he arrived? Edward was stunned when he heard the door close behind them, and the words that actually came from his boss. Charlie wanted him in Tacoma to cover a murder trial that was being held there, and Edward jumped at the opportunity. It would give him time and space to clear his head and think, and possibly even make it easier to do so without Kate around him, or the ache of seeing Bella every day. However, he found it not to be the case at all. The trial was a welcome distraction during the day, but each night he spent alone in his hotel room drove him to the brinks of his sanity. The texts from Kate asking him what was going on didn't help in the slightest. How could he tell her when he wasn't sure himself? His heart was torn between two women who meant everything to him, in very different ways. Between breaking a promise he'd made to one and the heart of the other, of which he wanted to do neither. He knew what he desired, and that was being with Bella, but he couldn't even be certain that the option of it was still open to him, or if he'd completely blown it. Bella still filled every one of his waking thoughts when he wasn't focused on his assignment, even when he was typing up his notes each night, as did the sad look in her eyes, and the half-smiles she wore the last time he saw her. He'd put that pain there. He'd taken away her smile. She didn't deserve any of it. How could she still love him after that, when she could find someone else to give her everything she could ever want and need? A man that was worthy of that love. When he returned from Tacoma at the end of his assignment, it only took one glaze setter to send his mind reeling once again. Bella was, without a doubt, wearing the most hideous of Christmas sweaters he'd ever seen, with a huge reindeer head situated on the front, and covering her from neck to waist. With the holidays right around the corner, the staff thought it would be a fun way to get into the spirit. And the theme for that day was "Wear your ugliest Christmas sweater to work." Yet, even in the god-awful sweater, her hair done in 2 braids with large jingling balls hanging from the tips of each, and elf shoes with the curled toes and all, she was still the most beautiful woman in the entire office. And no matter how jovial she tried to appear to everyone else, her eyes were still sad and drawn, and her smile was lacking so much of its usual luster. When her gaze met his from across the room, he felt as if a powerful blow had just been dealt to his chest. What once seemed like such an easy decision to make for the sake of his friend, had become an unbearable weight on both of them. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Edward heard from beside him, and looked up to find Kate leaning back against the edge of his desk. His eyes moved once again to their original position in time to catch Bella's, just before she turned to make her way to her office quickly, and closed the door behind her. "Kate, I can't do this." That evening Edward sat with Kate in his living room, and his leg was bouncing with anxiety. She seemed to have gotten upset when he'd first blurted out those words at his desk, and they hadn't spoken much since. He texted her after work to ask her to come over to his place to talk, and she still appeared hesitant to begin the conversation, so he knew he'd need to. Kate, I've never broken my word with you in the 20-odd years we've known each other, but you have to know that eventually I would have needed to bow out of this, right? Even without Bella being a factor, it was flawed, and as much as would have wanted to go through with it for you, I can't be certain that I would have been able to, but with her. Edward paused, shaking his head before glancing over to her. She's all I've wanted for 2 years, Kate. You have other solutions to the situation you're in, maybe not as you would like or imagined, but they are there and with the same end result, except maybe the money. I can't sacrifice Bella even if she doesn't want me anymore, because I took too fucking long. I still need to take the chance. I love her, can't you understand that? Kate looked down at her hands, where they were ringing in her lap, and nodded. I can't say that I didn't see this coming at all, especially after watching the two of you today. You couldn't keep your eyes off her more than usual, and she ran into her office the moment she saw me at your desk. Doesn't seem to me that she doesn't want you anymore, if she can't stand the sight of another woman anywhere near you. And you've never been as distant with me as you were the whole time you were away, either. I knew something was going on. And now you can't even look at me? Edward inquired, his jaw tensing as he leaned back into the couch. You know I'd do just about anything for you, Kate. And I'm sorry, but this is just too much. For everyone, not just for you and me, but Bella and Irina too. I know that. I need to stop taking the easy way out of everything, right? You don't need to be so delicate with me, Edward, Kate replied, finally turning her head to look at him. You stand to lose much more than I ever could. I knew that after one conversation with Bella. I couldn't see what you did before, what held your attention all this time. But she is everything you ever said she was, and then some. So why are you apologizing to me? Because the last thing I ever wanted to do was hurt you, and I've never made a promise to you that I couldn't keep, Edward answered with a heavy sigh. But Bella, she means so much to me, and I've hurt her in the worst way I possibly could. And for what? Neither of us should have agreed to this in the first place. Irina wasn't happy about it from the beginning either. No, she wasn't. I just wanted to give her a baby so badly, Kate replied as she folded her arms around herself. And you still can. There are other ways. Find a doctor that does take payments for the treatments, or tell your family and try getting pregnant yourself. You don't need me or the inheritance for that. No matter what, you still have someone who loves you unconditionally, with or without any of those things, Edward said, turning to face her more directly. I want you to be happy, Kate. But this isn't the answer. Kate's hands balled on either side of her, and she shook her head. Stop trying to justify yourself to me. Quit thinking about what would make me happy, or even Bella, for a moment. What do you want, Edward? Edward sighed and rested his arm on the back of the couch, propping his head on his hand, and giving the only answer he had. Her. I want Bella. She's everything I want. Then tell Bella that, and don't worry about me, Kate replied, sliding the diamond ring off her finger, and setting it on the coffee table in front of them. I know you think I'm spoiled and selfish, even if you'd never say it to me, because you care about me and you've shown that in more ways than I can count in all the years we've known each other, above and beyond the normal call of duty for a friend. And I love you, Edward. I hope you still believe that. But so does Bella, and what I saw in her isn't something that would disappear in the matter of days, or even weeks. She needs to know she's that important to you, and you deserve to be happy, too. What are you waiting for? You have no more excuses now. I needed to do this first. I can't go to her, with her believing I'm engaged, and have her think that I'm only doing it because I still have a backup plan in place if she says no. I need to do something right by her, Edward said, rubbing his palm across his forehead. I'll talk to her tomorrow. Good. And it's about time, Kate answered, leaning over to hug him gently. And thank you for everything you've ever done for me. But the situation with my family is mine to handle, not yours. So don't even think about feeling guilty about that. Got it? Got it, Edward replied with a weak smile. And I love you too, by the way. Kate stood and pressed her lips to the top of his head before releasing his hand. Now get some fucking sleep, so you're not completely delirious when you do talk to her. Edward was gone, and while Bella should have gotten some relief in that knowledge, it did the exact opposite. She knew she'd done the right thing, but it didn't tame the woman inside her that wanted to claw Kate's eyes out every time she saw her. She'd never been so irrational before, pissed off at Kate for taking him and using him to her advantage, at him for letting it happen, and at herself for not being stronger. What if she'd given him an actual ultimatum? Would that have changed anything? Sure, it might have, but she'd always have that lingering doubt of whether that was the sole reason he chose her. No, she didn't want to be one of his options, but his only one. The sound of the orchestra playing Christmas carols was really starting to grate on her after 3 days of listening to it fill the office, and she eventually closed her door a little too roughly on one of her passing co-workers humming along. She let him go. She should just deal with it and move on. But she kept coming back to one thing Kate said during their conversation, that if she thought Edward would go along with it, she would call off the engagement. Why should he have to be the one to do it? Just call it off yourself, if you have even a shred of decency in you. Or for God's sake, Edward, grow some balls. This is not noble, it's stupid, Bella growled in exasperation under her breath, snapping her laptop closed, and gathering it under her arm for a meeting with her father. Really fucking stupid. Bella walked into work with her headphones plugged securely into her ears. Nothing, not even Edward's impending return that day, was going to ruin her mood. For one day, she was going to let loose and be carefree, and focus on just how utterly ridiculous she looked. The sweater she wore was a gag gift her father had given her when she was 14 years old, the shoes she had accidentally kept 1 year in college when she played one of Santa's elves at the mall, and the jingle balls at the tips of her braids. Well, that was just a last-minute decision that morning. They'd been left over when her tree wouldn't fit any more decorations without looking cluttered, so she thought she'd put them to good use. Was she going overboard? Yes, but she really needed it. It would distract her from Edward, from Kate, from everything she wanted the escape from. And if jingling balls ringing in her ears, as well as from her toes, didn't do it, she didn't know what would. It's Christmas time. I'm supposed to be happy and cheerful, spreading joy or some such nonsense, she thought to herself. However, even the soothing music in her ears couldn't calm her the moment she spotted him walking in the door that morning. As hard as she tried to ignore Edward, it was nearly impossible each time she had to leave the confines of her office throughout the morning. She could only hear his voice over the buzz of the other conversations going on around her, only saw his face, and she swore she could even smell his cologne from the other side of the room. Then she saw Kate standing at his desk, relaxed and smiling as she leaned back against it, and Bella couldn't take any more. She didn't even dare to glance at Edward, afraid that she would find him just as nonchalant, acting as if nothing had happened. She considered leaving for the day, but knew that her father would question her as to why, and she really didn't want to talk about it with anyone, let alone him. Nor could she think up any other valid reason, since her heart shattering wasn't exactly a physical ailment that she could explain away. Bella knew she should just move on. That would be the logical thing to do. Find a man able and willing to give her everything she could ever need or desire, but there wasn't anyone who could. She wanted him, and no one else could give her that but Edward himself. When she walked out of her office that evening, the place was nearly deserted, and that was the first relief she'd felt all day. She'd been dreading stepping out and seeing Edward, or worse, Kate, and being unable to hold herself together long enough to get out to her car. Tomorrow will be better, she told herself as she made her way to the door. Every day will get easier once it's not so new. Keep telling yourself that, Bella, she muttered under her breath sarcastically as she tossed her purse into the passenger seat and lowered into her car. After another bubble bath and a couple of very large glasses of wine, Bella had relaxed herself enough to lie down in her bed and attempt to sleep, despite the tension of the day. Her head was swimming with the effects of the alcohol, and it felt good to not have to think. For a brief precious time, there was no Edward haunting her thoughts, no screwed-up situation with Kate, and no ache in her heart that resulted from it all. Just 8 hours of calm, dreamless slumber. When she walked into work the next morning, she had a determination about her to remain strong and move forward. A lot of women carried on with their life past and unrequited love, right? She couldn't allow Edward Cullen to thoroughly destroy her, no matter how she felt for him. She even gave him a smile and nod as she passed by his desk and caught his eye, and didn't completely crumble when he returned it. So far, so good, Bella whispered to herself once she was settled at her desk, watching her laptop boot up to begin her day. An hour later, she was on her way to refill her coffee, and couldn't help but take notice of Kate when she entered. The woman gave her a brief glance, and then quickly looked away again with a stiffened posture. What the hell is her problem? She's gotten what she wanted, hasn't she? I'm out of the way and she's free to manipulate Edward to her heart's content. Some friend. And how can Edward actually be friends with a cold, callous woman like this? These thoughts were whirling through her mind as she stepped up to the counter and reached for the coffee pot. However, as she poured, she also noticed another discernible difference in the woman beside her. She wasn't wearing the ring that had been gracing her finger even the day before. She wasn't sure what to make of that, and didn't want to assume anything, either, even as Kate skirted around her without a single word on her way out. Bella returned to her office slowly, confused but undeniably curious. Kate had done a complete 180 and was suddenly treating her as if she was the villain in the situation. Maybe she was, in some sense. Telling Edward she loved him at the end of that phone call was not entirely necessary, but she'd wanted to know what it felt like to say it to him, to be able to do so just once before he officially began the charade that would be his marriage. Yet, her heart still pounded with hope that she knew she shouldn't have. Maybe Kate just took it off to shower and never put it back on. It felt wrong to consider any other possibility for the absence of her engagement ring, but she couldn't stop the curiosity from swelling within her. She dug through her purse for her phone, and did the one thing she swore she wasn't going to do again. Texted Edward. "Where's Kate's rock?" She typed and sent it off to him, glancing out her office window to watch him look to his desk and pick up his phone. His head turned in her direction, and she quickly sat down, avoiding his eyes, and beginning to sort through a few of her emails. The screen of her phone lit up with a message icon in the corner, and her gaze shifted over. But she didn't reach for it right away. It seemed so desperate to do so, when she didn't even know what the text would say. There could be a very good reason behind it. But how would that explain the bristly reception she'd gotten from Kate in the break room? Bella took her phone in her hand, and the other rose to cover her mouth as she read the message. "On my coffee table. The engagement is off." Her eyes shot up to look at him again, and his elbow was rested on his desktop with his hand threaded in his hair. He wasn't engaged anymore, but he still seemed so tense. Had he called off the engagement and now felt guilty about it? Or maybe Kate had somehow found an honorable bone in her body and set him free? Again, her actions from that morning contradicted that explanation. So, what was he so upset about? Bella's phone chimed again, and she looked down to find another text from Edward and immediately opened at that time. "I would really like to talk to you, Bella, but I can understand if you don't wish to." Edward glanced at his phone periodically throughout the day, but she never replied. He hadn't really expected her to, knowing full well that it was probably too late. She should have been his priority from the very beginning, everything that truly mattered to him. So he couldn't really blame her. Eyes had been on him all morning, following his every move. Once the word began spreading about the absence of Kate's engagement ring, the fact that it was almost immediately after his return from Tacoma of course paved the way for more rumors to arise. Had he strayed during his time away? Had she? A bit uncreative as far as assumptions went, but easy enough to think with the way they had been avoiding each other all day. And all the more reason he could not take the chance of approaching Bella there at work. He couldn't direct all that attention to her as well. Kate was still upset, despite their talk the night before, and his belief that she understood. She'd seemed so calm by the time she left his house, and then by morning, the chill had blown back in with her demeanor. She wouldn't look at him, talk to him, nothing. It was as if he wasn't even there, and to be honest, that hurt Edward quite a lot. She was acting every bit the spoiled little rich girl he'd always insisted that she wasn't, who didn't like the word no, regardless of logic. He had done everything he could for her throughout their lives, right down to posing as her fiancé to help her get what she wanted, and the one time he thought of himself in any way, he was met with the silent treatment. It was because of that agreement that he'd hurt the woman he loved needlessly, and thereby, might have destroyed the chance at everything he could ever want. Was he that unimportant to Kate in comparison to her own desires? It was her insistence that he talk to Bella in the first place, even though it terrified him beyond measure. Maybe Kate had been hoping that Bella would do exactly as Edward had feared all that time, and turn him down. He hated to think that way of a woman he'd known nearly his entire life, and wanted to believe she cared for him as she claimed. But it was hard to see at that moment. Then, as he watched Bella leave at the end of the day without a word or even a glance, his heart sank even more, and he packed up to go home himself. He'd lost everything due to his own stupidity, blindness, and cowardice. His oldest friend and the woman he desired above all others. Edward pulled up in front of his house that night, with the intention of grabbing a beer from his fridge and maybe forcing some leftovers down his throat before heading to bed. However, as he walked up the steps to his door, a soft sniffle to his left drew his attention. He looked over and saw a puff of condensed breath billow in the air, and Bella curled into a chair in the dark corner of his porch. His head spun back to his driveway before returning to her with widened eyes. "Where's your car?" "Around the corner, over there," Bella replied quietly, pointing toward the end of the street. "It was stupid enough for me to leave my car here in your driveway all night the last time when you were engaged to another woman. But I wasn't exactly thinking clearly either. It would be even worse if someone saw it here the same day you broke off that engagement. So you're hiding out here on my dark, cold porch?" Edward asked and was greeted with a shrug from her. "Come inside, please." Bella quickly rose as he unlocked the door and hurried inside once it was open. "I hate sneaking around, but this would be really bad for both of us." Edward nodded in understanding and stepped in behind her, closing the door and offering her some tea or coffee to warm up, but she shook her head and declined. "So, what brings you here? Isn't that obvious?" Bella asked dubiously with a brief, uncomfortable laugh, and brought her eyes up to his. "You threw me for a bit of a loop today, and you said you wanted to talk to me. And I didn't think it should be done at work or through text. I'm sorry, maybe I should have just called." "No, I'm glad you're here. Believe me, I am. I just didn't think you wanted anything to do with me, and after all this, you have every reason not to," Edward replied with his hands driving into his pockets, in an attempt to quell some of the anxiety he was feeling. "I've been a jackass. Maybe a little," Bella agreed with the hint of a smile, shifting slightly from foot to foot. "Are we just going to stand here by the door all night? Or can we sit down and talk?" Edward sighed heavily in frustration with himself, removing his hand from his pocket to gesture toward the living room. "Of course, please sit down. And thank you for coming over. I really didn't think you'd want to talk to me." Bella entered the room and settled on the couch, folding her fingers in her lap. As he sat down next to her, "Honestly, I've been weighing it out in my mind all day and almost didn't. You just looked so upset about it all, and I didn't know what to think. But I did want to talk to you as well, so here I am." Edward watched her and noticed that her eyes were fixed on the diamond ring sitting on the coffee table, exactly where Kate had left it the night before. "I wasn't upset, at least, not with you. I'm very sorry that you were caught up in the middle of all this, Bella. I've done everything so wrong and backward, but I never wanted to hurt you. We both know it wasn't all you, Edward. We each played our own parts in this." "So what happened?" Bella asked, getting right to the point and turning her head toward him. He could see her guard was still up with him, in her stiffened posture and the tightness of her lips. "Last I knew, everything was full steam ahead and you were going through with it. And you two seemed just fine yesterday. Did she let you off the hook or something?" "No, I broke it off. I couldn't do it, even for Kate," Edward answered, shaking his head. "It was ridiculous before, I can see that now. I would have been miserable, and so would Irina. But hurting you in the process as well, it was too much. And now, she hates me for it." Bella mumbled and stopped him before he could protest. "Yes, she does. I could feel the ice shards coming off her at me in the break room this morning, and all day, every time she glared at me. I didn't need to be a genius to see that she blames me for this." Edward gave a disgusted laugh and leaned his head back on the couch. "I never thought I would hear myself say this, but I honestly couldn't care less about whom Kate blames or how she feels right now. But I also never dreamed that I would ever see the side of her that I have since last night. I thought or at least our friendship, meant more to her than that, and clearly, I was very wrong." Bella's breath was halted in her throat, and her eyes were wide in surprise as she took him in. He sounded angry, very angry, and even more hurt. Edward had always seemed to stand in ultimate defense of his friend, no matter how selfish and almost cruel she could be at times, and there was no doubt this was affecting him deeply. "I'm sorry, Edward." "No, you have nothing to be sorry for, and definitely not for this. So please don't even say that," Edward said tensely, his head making sharp movements back and forth as he spoke, before bringing his eyes back to her. "I've jumped through hoop after hoop for her. I've been her fucking lapdog for years, and never truly realized that all she really cares about is herself. I should have seen it ages ago, or at the very least, when she concocted all this. But I trusted her, so if anyone should be sorry, it's me." And her. It's not all your fault, so why are you solely beating yourself up for this? Bella replied gently as she gazed at him, her hands cupping around her knees. So now what? How are you going to explain this to everyone? As close to the truth as I can, without getting too personal. No matter what she's done or said, I still won't be the one to expose her or Irina, Edward answered, his tone losing some of its bite from a moment before. Her family was never really thrilled with the idea of us getting married in the first place. Even with as long as we've known each other, I'm not quite in the same social class with her. Being friends was one thing, joining our family names was completely different. But what Kate wants Kate gets when it comes to them. So whatever she wants to say is up to her, but that's the one I'm going with. It's not a complete lie. I see, Bella said with a sigh and wrapped her arms around her middle. That still leaves you pretty stuck. Even with that explanation, you can't really move forward in your life too quickly. I mean, it's not like you and I could really jump right into a relationship so soon after a broken engagement. It would not only look but feel like a rebound. Add in everything that's transpired between us in this situation, it just seems like a really bad decision to move too fast for either of us. And we work together, too. Edward nodded and turned his head toward her. I wasn't expecting that of you, Bella. I know what I've put you through with this was unfair and hurtful, whether I intended it or not. I just wanted to talk to you about this myself and tell you that, no matter what, my feelings for you won't change. Even if you told me that I've lost my chance with you, I wouldn't say that. Not right away doesn't mean never, Bella replied, swallowing hard and meeting his eyes. From what you've said, you've seen me as this one forbidden element in your life that was out of your reach for quite some time. Now that you know that isn't the case, will that lessen my allure to you? They do say that the deepest desires are sometimes spawned from what you can't have. And even this situation with Kate still put me in that category. I'm sorry if it sounds selfish, but I want to know that what you feel is for the right reasons. I don't think it's selfish at all. I haven't exactly portrayed myself as a beacon of trust, Edward said with a self-loathing laugh. In some ways, you have. Despite everything, you're still not betraying Kate by letting her secret out. That's definitely a point or two in your favor. How do you know that isn't some self-serving plan to save my own face? Edward asked hypothetically, raising an eyebrow in question. Bella tilted her head and rolled her eyes, because that would be a complete contradiction to the man I've come to see. If you were really that worried about saving your own face, you wouldn't have agreed to the charade that would have ultimately made you out to be a fool in the end, no matter what or who it was for. So I don't believe that at all. Edward released a slow breath, and his eyes rose to the ceiling overhead. I don't know how to do this without hurting you in some way, and I've done enough of that already. I don't want to hurt you either, Edward. My feelings aren't the only ones at stake here, right? Bella's eyes lowered to his lap where his fist was clenched tightly on his thigh. Swallowing against the lump in her throat, she reached over to uncurl his fingers and gently slid her hand into his. Warmth radiated over her skin at their touch, and she traced her thumb from his wrist to his knuckles. None of this is going to be easy for either of us. But we just need to give it time and see what happens. You are who I want, Edward. There was nothing forbidding you from me before, but my own fear. And I really wish I could have been a little braver, too. It's not always the guy's responsibility to make the first move. This whole thing could have been avoided. I'm just not sure how I would have handled it if I told you and you'd laughed at me. I would never laugh at you, Bella. Even if I hadn't felt this way, I could never do that to you, Edward replied, giving her hand a gentle squeeze, and her still chilled fingertips pressed into his palm. And I've been doing some thinking over the past few days. I think it would be best for everyone if I were to find another job. Bella's eyes rose quickly with a sharp inhale, and began shaking her head. No, why would you do that? How is that supposed to be better? You love this job, why? Hiding the way I felt about you was difficult before. It will be next to impossible now. I can't make you fodder for the rumor mill right along with me like that, Edward answered calmly. I will anyway, Edward. If and when we ever decide to move forward with this, they are going to talk. Like I was the reason you left, and why you ended your engagement. It won't really be a lie either, Bella said, tucking her hair behind her ear, only for it to fall forward again. Edward lifted his free hand to repeat her action, and watched her eyes close, as his fingertips ghosted along her jaw as he retracted his touch. Or just that I missed you and seeing you every day, and that definitely won't be a lie. Bella's gaze met his and held it for a moment before leaning toward him, brushing her lips softly against the corner of his mouth. I'll miss you, too. Out of sight does not mean out of mind. Their foreheads rested together and her breath danced over his skin with her words following that near kiss. He lifted her hand that he was still holding and held it to his chest as his head tilted to press his lips to her forehead. Never, Bella. Edward spent hours after Bella left that night at his computer, browsing through job listings and thinking about how he was going to approach his boss about his plans. Charlie had presented him with opportunities that he never could have dreamed of anywhere else, believed in him, and he was just going to walk away, all because he had fallen in love with his daughter, and that would have been an even more difficult task to explain as a reason for leaving. The following day, he stepped into the office, and conversation was abuzz even at the early hour. It was Friday and everyone was also excited about the holiday party that would be taking place that evening. Yet, Edward could not bring himself to partake in the enthusiasm. He'd found a potential prospect online the night before, and he would be making the call at lunch. It was an even smaller publication than the one he presently worked at, less pay. But it held the opportunity for investigative reporting, which was something that had always intrigued him. Edward caught Bella's gaze several times throughout the morning, and each time he did, it only strengthened his resolve. Her eyes still held that sadness within them, and it tore at his heart to see it there. The call was relatively successful. They'd read his work and were impressed, requesting that he come in the following Thursday for an interview with a letter of recommendation from his present employer. That caused Edward's stomach to tighten. He had less than a week to acquire that from Charlie, which meant he'd have to talk to him much sooner than he'd hoped. Edward's mind was whirling throughout the remainder of the day, even when he attempted to focus on the typed words on his screen. Monday. He would talk to him on Monday. That would give him time to ponder what he'd say to Charlie and not ruin the festivities that night. He'd actually considered staying home after work, but then he received a text from Bella as he was walking out to his car. "Are you going tonight?" Edward started the engine to allow it to warm up for a moment before leaving, staring at the screen of his phone. The prospect of seeing her outside of work, even if they couldn't really touch or talk, was suddenly too much for him to resist. "Probably. You?" Bella's reply was almost immediate. "Yeah, kinda have to, being the boss's daughter and all. See you there if you decide to come. XXX. Oh God, this was a mistake," Edward muttered to himself under his breath behind the tumbler of whiskey he held, gazing across the dimly lit room, though there might as well have been floodlights illuminating the space around him. Bella had finally arrived, wearing a short, strapless red velvet dress, doing nothing to hide the soft pale skin of her neck, shoulders and chest, and her legs. Damn, her legs looked incredible. Her hair was pulled away from her face, allowing all those long dark curls to cascade down her back. She'd always been beautiful to him, but that night, even breathtaking wasn't a strong enough word to describe her. Perfect, radiant, ravishing. No, those weren't quite accurate either. "Something caught in your eye, kid?" Charlie's voice sounded from beside him, and Edward's head spun quickly. His eyes gestured over to his daughter before returning to the man beside him. Edward's nervousness rose to new heights as Charlie's face remained vacant of expression. "No sir. Edward, I think you and I need to have a little talk, don't you?" Charlie replied with a lifted brow, not waiting for a reply and making his way toward the doors. Edward set the tumbler down on the table and swallowed hard, following the man to the exit. His voice was lost on him, trying to think of anything that he could possibly say to excuse the obvious gawking he'd been doing at Bella inside, but nothing came to him. "I got an interesting phone call today," Charlie began, sipping at the beer he still held in his hand, and Edward's brow furrowed. That certainly wasn't what he'd been expecting at all. "It seems that one of my best guys is seeking employment elsewhere, and I guess I'm a little more than curious as to why." Edward's hand rose to run back and forth over his forehead, his heart rising into his throat. "I was going to talk to you about it after the weekend, sir. I'm not unhappy with working here, and I'm certainly not ungrateful for the opportunities you've given me. It's for personal reasons." "Yeah, I heard about that," Charlie said with a nod. "Normally, I would say that personal issues have no place in the work environment, but quite honestly, I have to ask, what took you so long to smarten up?" Edward's eyes widened at the man as they followed him to one of the seats in the corner. "Pardon?" "Edward, sit down," Charlie replied, motioning to the chair beside him, and waiting until Edward was seated before he continued. "I've been in this business a long time, going on 30 years. As I'm sure you can understand, I didn't get to where I am and not be good at reading people. It's all part and parcel to being good at what we do." There was nothing about that engagement that appeared even remotely real. And I'm sorry, but it doesn't take a whole lot of intuition for it to be blatantly clear that you are not Kate's type in any sense of the word. Add that to the fact that you haven't been able to keep your eyes off my daughter from the first day I hired you. It never made sense. Edward shifted nervously in his seat, once again attempting to conjure any response he could, and coming up short. Sir, I really don't. Quit with the sir bullshit first of all. He interrupted the stammering response and took Edward by surprise. Charlie Swan was hardly ever known to curse beyond an occasional damn, especially in front of his employees. And second, I ask again, why the hell would you go through with an engagement to a woman who clearly prefers other women, when it's obvious that you're in love with Bella? Edward cleared his throat loudly and averted his eyes from the man. I don't know how to answer that, see Charlie, but why would you announce the engagement to the whole office? If you believed it to be fake? Charlie shrugged nonchalantly. Something needed to get your head out of your ass, and hers as well, and it seems to have worked too, with the way you two have been looking at one another anytime you're within eye range of the other. I know I seem like a hard ass when it comes to Bella, but I only want the best for my baby. She's all I've got and she means everything to me. I want her to be happy, and not one of these clowns around here even come close to fitting the bill. But you're a good man, even if your brain is wired a bit screwy at times, your heart is in the right place. So you want my advice? Edward slowly brought his gaze back to Charlie, curious as to what the man would actually have to say. Charlie leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, holding his drink between his hands as he looked at Edward intently. I really hate to lose good people, and if I thought it would change your mind, I would offer you anything you wanted in order to have you stay. As it is, I will definitely write you a glowing recommendation letter, because you've earned it. But don't let anything stop you from doing the only thing that makes sense here. Sweep that daughter of mine off her feet and take good care of my baby. I will, thank you, Charlie, Edward replied, the tension gradually releasing from his shoulders with Charlie's words. Now, my lovely daughter has agreed to be my designated driver, so I am going to take full advantage of that open bar tonight. Charlie started, clapping one hand on the arm of the chair, before rising and looking back to Edward one more time. And Edward, don't screw this up. You heard her again, and you will not like who you see the next time we speak. Seeing Edward in that gray V-neck sweater and a pair of dark-washed jeans when Bella walked in that night was almost more than she could handle until she watched him leave the hall with her father. Shit, she hissed under her breath as she reached for a glass of Coke on the buffet table, suddenly wishing she hadn't agreed to be her father's designated driver that night. Just what she needed. Right as things began moving in a hopeful direction, Charlie had to swoop in and scare the crap out of the man she wanted to be with more than anything. Granted, she'd wanted to take things slow with him, but one talk with her dad had the potential to bring it all to a screeching halt. Wow, Bella, you look amazing tonight. Bella's head turned toward the voice, and Eric was standing beside her, his eyes running over the length of her body. She laughed uncomfortably and all at once cursed her decision on what to wear that night. When she was standing at the entrance to her closet earlier that evening, it seemed like a good idea, fun, festive, and she'd secretly hoped that Edward would like what he saw. However, she hadn't thought about the fact that he wouldn't be the only man looking at her that night. Thanks. Has Angela found you yet? I think she was just looking for you, Bella said quickly in an attempt to divert his attention away from her. Oh, no, guess I should go see what she wanted, he replied in an almost dejected voice, as if he knew he was being turned down before he could even make a move. As soon as he was out of earshot, Bella quickly made her way to the side of the room to stand beside the only other person she talked to on a regular basis, Jasper, one of the senior editors. Please help me. Jasper glanced over to her following her barely audible request, noticing that she appeared nervous, and her shoulders were a little too square to be natural. Well, good evening to you too, Miss Bella. Lovely night. Bella sighed heavily in frustration. Please, don't draw any more attention over here than necessary. I need someone to dance with me, and preferably someone who won't stare down my dress the whole time, or attempt to grope my ass. And I know your wife would kill you if you did, so will you please dance with me? Jasper tilted his head to watch her as she spoke, noting her awkward stance and the nervousness behind her request. He also knew it took a lot for her to even approach anyone on a social level, since she was always so quiet and reserved. However, her shoulders were trembling slightly, and there was even a glisten to her eyes. She was clearly very uncomfortable. How can I possibly leave a lady in distress? I'm sure Alice wouldn't mind at all, since she had to stay home with the kids tonight. Bella's eyes met his and glanced down to the hand he'd extended out for hers, and Jasper gave her a warm, kind smile. "Thank you." What Bella hadn't been expecting, as she hadn't really associated with him often outside of work, was that Jasper was one hell of a dancer. She almost completely forgot about everything else going on in her life recently, and became lost in their movements around the floor. She was having fun for the first time in as long as she could remember, thoroughly enjoying herself. Until her eyes met Edward's when the tempo of the music slowed, and Jasper had pulled her closer. She longed to feel his arms around her that way, to be pressed against his body. Time was the one thing they needed from one another, yet it was the hardest for both of them to give. "One dance won't hurt, Bella," Jasper said softly in her ear, as if he was drawing her thoughts straight from her mind, and she pulled her head back from him slowly. "If you can ask a married man to dance, there's nothing saying that you can't do so with him. No one is going to think any more of you dancing with him than they do right now with me." "I don't think so, Jasper. He's only just ended his engagement." "You knew exactly who I was talking about even though I never mentioned his name," Jasper replied with a knowing smile, and then leaned into her ear again. "The tension between the two of you is so thick, I'm surprised more people haven't noticed." "Go to him, Bella." Bella shifted nervously in his arms as he pulled back, nodding over to Edward standing by his table, tipping back a tumbler of amber liquid. She nodded to Jasper and slowly walked away from him, crossing the room toward Edward and trying to quell her raging nerves all the way over. Stopping in front of him, her eyes met his for a prolonged moment of silence before she could finally find her voice again. "Would you like to dance with me, Edward? You have no right to be jealous, you idiot." "That could be you, if you hadn't fucked up royally," Edward thought to himself as he watched Bella dancing with their senior editor. Everyone knew that Jasper was one of the most happily married men they worked with, but that didn't stop the knot that was coiling in the pit of Edward's stomach. Married or not, he was making her smile as he spun her around the floor, putting the sparkle back in her eyes, even if only for a moment at a time. Bella was having fun, and he couldn't fault her for that. He only wished that he could have been the man to bring that out in her. Then their gazes met once again, and that look reappeared. He wasn't sure what was being said between them, but Bella quickly shifted from pain to nervous in the blink of an eye, and then she began walking toward him, and his heart began to pound erratically within him, until she finally spoke and asked him to dance. The thumping seemed to halt altogether with those words, and all he could manage in that moment was a nod. When they reached the edge of the dance floor, she turned to him and slid her arms around his neck. His hands settled on either side of her waist, and they began to sway back and forth to the slow beat of the music, their eyes never leaving the other's gaze. "We're dancing, Edward. I'm pretty sure it would be okay if we were a little closer," Bella whispered, and he felt her fingers twitching a little at the base of his neck, as if resisting the urge to touch his skin or maybe even toy with the ends of his hair. Edward's arms slowly encircled her waist and held her close to him. She felt so warm and smelled so good, and the skin of her temple was so soft against his jaw. It took everything in him to restrain a groan of the longing he felt for her. Instead, he leaned down to whisper in her ear, "You look incredible tonight, Bella." "So do you," she murmured back, her fingers linking behind his neck. "I have to keep reminding myself not to stare." "Did my father scare you away?" "Not even close. Quite the opposite, actually," Edward replied, and Bella pulled her head back to gaze at him. "But even if he disapproved, it wouldn't change the way I feel about you." Bella held his eyes with hers and took a slow, shaky breath. "Tell me again why we're waiting. I know we both had our reasons, but I'm having difficulty remembering what they were or why they were so important." Edward pulled her closer again until his lips returned to beside her ear. "Because I need to earn your trust, so that you never have any reason to doubt how much I love you. And people would talk, Bella. They're going to anyway, if they're not already. So why does it really matter so much what people think or say?" Bella replied in a soft whisper, and her breath on his skin caused him to shiver. "And how will either of us know any of that if we can never show each other how we feel?" "But you said." "I know what I said last night, Edward. Every single word of it has been running through my mind ever since," Bella replied, and her deep breath pressed her chest more firmly against his. "We've both wasted so much time being idiots and worrying about the wrong things. Haven't there been enough secrets without adding more?" "Yes, but some secrets I can't share because they aren't mine to do so," Edward answered with a sigh. "I'm angry, but not spiteful." "I'm not asking you to do that," Bella emphasized and brought her eyes back to meet his. "I would never ask that of you. And if you really think the wait is necessary, I'll do it. You're worth waiting for." "But is it?" I don't know, Edward mumbled softly and closed his eyes. I know that I don't want to keep you a secret. I could handle the talk. Heaven knows there's plenty of that going around already about me and Kate. But when it involves you, that's entirely different. No, it's not. You don't want to keep me a secret? Then you don't have to. I'm a big girl, I can handle it. If it means that at the end of the day we'd have each other, who cares what they say? It's not important. Bella replied with a shake of her head. Are we going to lead the rest of our lives based on what others think or say? Isn't this all that matters when all is said and done? You and me? Edward was about to reply when the song ended, and was replaced by something a little more up-tempo, and instead chuckled. I'm a really lousy dancer once actual movement is required. Bella laughed as well and rested her forehead on his shoulder. Me too, when I'm not being led. Edward kept his hand on the small of her back as they stepped away from the dance floor and over to the table to where it was more private. That is what's important to me, Bella, but I can't just think about what's important to me or what I want. What I want is simple. I want you, Bella replied, gazing up at him with those beautiful brown eyes. Like I said, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this. People are going to talk, there's no way around it. Regardless of how long we do or do not wait. And once the truth comes out, what will it have been for? I know you're right, Bella. It's just hard for me to even imagine the things they'd think about you, Edward said, lowering his eyes. You don't deserve that. All that really matters to me is what you think of me, so don't worry about that, Bella replied, stepping minimally closer to him. We both know the truth, that this isn't some rebound from a bad breakup, so I don't know why I ever said anything like that. So aside from the talk, is there anything else holding you back? No, Edward answered immediately, bringing his eyes back up to meet hers. This is what I want, to be with you, Bella. Then, we can start slow. Maybe go out to dinner or something, Bella said with a shrug. I'm not implying that we make spectacles of ourselves or have make-out sessions in my office. I'm really not that kind of person. I prefer to keep my personal life private, and I always have. And you seem to as well. But you said yourself that you wouldn't be able to hide the way you feel about me, and I'm not as successful at that as I thought either. There are people that already know. I know, Edward answered with a soft chuckle, meeting her questioning gaze. Your father. Bella tugged at her lip with her teeth and shook her head. He always was the observant one in the family. Well, if we're throwing caution to the wind, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night, Miss Swan? Edward asked, his voice still slightly nervous. I would really like that, Mr. Cullen. Bella raced around her apartment, attempting to refrain from tugging at her hair, as it would only serve to make her even later for her dinner with Edward if she had to fix it. She'd already had to change her pantyhose once when her nails snagged them, resulting in a run from her thigh to her ankle, and now, she couldn't find her keys as well. Okay. I had them last night when I came in, Bella mumbled to herself, closing her eyes as she retraced her steps from the evening before. And I went straight to bed. She walked into her bedroom and checked her dresser and nightstand again, but as with the last 3 times she had done so, they were nowhere to be found. With a groan of frustration, she returned to the living room to collect her thoughts. No, I went to the bathroom first, she exclaimed loudly and hurried down the hall, releasing a sigh of relief when she spotted them there on the counter beside the sink. Oh, thank God. Duh, Bella. She felt a little ridiculous, much like a teenage girl, nervous about her first date as she nearly ran out to her car. She'd never been so excited about a simple dinner with a man before. But it wasn't an entirely unpleasant feeling. When she pulled into the parking lot of the restaurant, her eyes scanned her surroundings for Edward's car, and her excitement shifted to trepidation. Most of the spaces were full, but she couldn't spot it anywhere in the crowd of vehicles. Maybe he was running late, too. She hoped so. Reservation for Cullen, Bella said calmly to the greeter, figuring she could at least put the request in to be seated while she waited for him to arrive. Yes, Miss Swan. Mr. Cullen has been expecting you. Right this way, the man said, taking her by surprise. Bella's brow rose slightly, but she followed him to the back of the restaurant. The moment her eyes met Edward's, he rose from his chair to greet her, and his lips quirked upward as he took her in. She did the same, running her gaze along his form. He looked incredible in a dark gray shirt, with the first 2 buttons undone and black pants. It appeared as if he'd been running his hands through his hair quite a bit, causing it to stick up in random directions, but she definitely didn't mind that. Her attention was pulled away as she was asked if she would like a drink. Glass of Merlot, please. Hi, Edward said softly as soon as the man left, leaning toward her to kiss her cheek. "Hi," she replied with a nervous smile and settled into the chair he was holding out for her. "I'm sorry I'm late. I'm usually far more punctual than this, but I couldn't find my keys and it was just a huge mess." "Bella, it's fine. You're here, you're okay, and that's all that matters to me," Edward answered and sat back down across from her, shaking his head. "I'm just glad you didn't change your mind." "No, definitely not. And if I had, I would have texted you or something," Bella responded and folded her hands in her lap. "If anything, I think I was a bit anxious about tonight." "Good," Edward said, and then his eyes widened when she raised an eyebrow at him. "I mean, not good that you were so anxious, but shit. It was a good anxious, right?" Bella's smile grew as he gazed at her somewhat nervously and nodded. "Yes, Edward, it was a very good anxious." The conversation was kept simple until their entrees arrived and Bella began twirling her pasta distractedly with her fork. "So, my dad was talking to me on the way home last night, and he said you were still planning on leaving?" Edward nodded as he cut through his steak and then shrugged. "It just seems to make sense, not for the same reasons, but in all honesty personal and professional lives should be kept separate, I think. Who knows, you might get sick of me if you have to see me all day at work and then after as well." "No, I highly doubt that," Bella replied quickly and shook her head. "Is it something you really want, though, or is it solely because of us?" "A little bit of both, to tell you the truth," Edward answered and brought his fork to his mouth. Bella couldn't help but watch the movement of his jaw as he chewed or the bobbing of his Adam's apple when he swallowed, while waiting for him to continue. "Not that I couldn't remain appropriate at work, but those make-out sessions in your office might be awfully tempting." Bella's face heated at the memory of her words from the night before, as well as the images conjured in her mind at his suggestion, even if only in jest. "And the other reason? It's a new experience, a change of pace, and I'm actually looking forward to it, if I even get the job," Edward replied, and attempted to shrug casually, but Bella could see in his features that he was more restless about it than he portrayed. "You will. They'd be stupid if they didn't hire you, and I have no doubt that my father will tell them that in no uncertain terms," she said with a smile. "He's pretty damn fond of you, and he doesn't dole out compliments often, as I'm sure you've realized. A good work from him is like accolades from anyone else, so admiration is something unprecedented." Edward hummed, unsure of how to respond to that. It was true that Charlie Swan was a difficult man to impress, but hearing it put that way by Bella made him more nervous about letting him down. "I understand why you're leaving. I just wish you didn't have to," Bella admitted, her eyes falling to her plate again. "It's going to be weird not seeing you there every day. And now that Kate quit." "Kate quit?" Edward asked in shock, coughing a little on the sip of wine he'd just taken. "Since when?" "Since yesterday morning." "I thought you would have known that," Bella replied in an astonished voice, her brow furrowed as she gazed at him. Edward shook his head in response. "No, I had no idea. She hasn't spoken to me at all since the other night, and I actually didn't notice that she wasn't there yesterday. I guess my mind was busy elsewhere." "Oh," Bella answered as his hand gestured to her, and then she shifted in her seat before continuing. "Yeah, she didn't even give notice, she just quit. I suppose I thought you might change your mind after that." "Well, I wasn't leaving because of her in the first place," Edward stated as he wiped his mouth on the napkin and then leaned forward on his arms. "I really want things to work between us, Bella, and we've both seen what can happen with relationships in the workplace, even without the gossip, which I know we've said we're just going to ignore. Your personal life can easily be dragged into the office, good or bad. And a simple disagreement could turn into a full-blown argument without that space to cool down. Not that I think that would happen, necessarily, but you know what I mean?" "Yeah, I do. And I understand," Bella replied with a nod, but kept her eyes down. "And as long as it's not your only reason, then it's a good thing." "No, definitely not my only reason, though just as important," Edward said and tilted his head to catch her attention. "I adore you, Bella, and the way I'd like to see our relationship progress is something that's very personal to me. I don't want to keep you a secret and I have no intention of doing so, but this is still private. And this job could also be a huge opportunity for me career-wise." Bella's shoulders fell with a breath of relief, and she gave him a smile. "I agree. And it does give us more to look forward to at the end of our days as well." "That it does," Edward replied with a quirky grin and resumed eating. The quiet that hung between them as they finished their meals with only snippets of conversation scattered amongst it didn't feel awkward at all. There was a comfort that seemed to settle over them in one another's presence, and neither felt the need to force mindless chatter to fill the silences. Nothing even remotely like any other date she'd had in her life. The first hint of awkwardness between them came when he walked her out to her car after paying the bill, his hands shoved in his pockets and her arms pulling her jacket tightly around her waist. Nervous smiles graced their lips as they glanced at each other, both chuckling at the same time. "Why is this so weird?" Bella asked, leaning back against her car door. "I don't know about you, but I'm kind of stalling," Edward answered honestly and laughed again. "On most dates, I do the gentlemanly thing of picking a woman up and walking her to her door at the end of the evening, and since we met here, I have to say goodnight now, and I'm really not looking forward to it." "Neither am I," Bella sighed, looking down to the ground. "I wouldn't really object to the walking me to my door thing, if you wanted to. It's a little cold out here to be doing too much more stalling, don't you think?" Edward nodded and pulled his keys out of his pocket. "I'll be right behind you." "Where did you park anyway? I didn't see your car anywhere," Bella inquired and watched his hand rise, pressing the alarm button on his keychain. Her head turned at the distant chirp and saw the flash of headlights clear on the other side of the parking lot. "Well, there explains that." Edward chuckled and brushed her cheek lightly with the back of his index finger to bring her gaze back to him. "Get in your car, Bella, you're freezing." Bella nodded quickly and unlocked her door, sliding in and watching Edward jog across the parking lot to his car. She started the engine and waited until she saw him pulling around, finally backing out once he was a few feet behind her. Bella's fingers were trembling despite her tight hold on the steering wheel, partially from the cold, but mostly from the anticipation of the few extra minutes she would have with Edward before they parted for the evening. She periodically glanced at him through her rearview mirror and chuckled when she caught him fussing with his hair when his face was illuminated by the passing streetlight overhead. When she finally turned into her space in front of the apartment building, she stepped out as Edward's car pulled in beside her and couldn't stop the smile from spreading across her lips when his head rose above the roof of the vehicle. He quickly circled around the back to move up behind her, and she felt his arm slip around her waist. "Would you mind sharing with the class what you found so funny back there?" Edward asked with his lips close to her ear, and his breath caused her nerves to send a pleasurable shiver down her entire spine. "Your pointless endeavor to fix your hair," Bella answered as casually as she could manage, but his voice was doing anything but calming her. Warmth spread through her as they walked inside and began the trek up the stairs to her apartment. She turned to face him right outside her door, and her eyes rose to meet his, and they were each as speechless as the other. "So," Edward began, but showed no sign of continuing, only gazed at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Would you like to come in for a few minutes?" Bella asked, hoping for the evening to not have to end so soon. "I could make some coffee or something." "I probably shouldn't," Edward replied, and her eyes fell in disappointment. "Not that I wouldn't love to, but I have church with my family early in the morning." Bella's brow lifted and she gazed at him incredulously. "A church boy, huh?" "Not religiously, no pun intended," Edward answered with a soft chuckle. "This time of year, my mother tends to insist on taking me along. It makes her happy, so I don't complain." "Such a dutiful son," Bella teased lightly and gave a gentle nudge to his abdomen, causing him to roll his eyes, but his smile never dimmed. "So, I guess we should say goodnight then." "Yeah, I guess we should," Edward said with all humor disappearing from his tone and features, gazing at her intently. "As much as I really don't want to. I've really enjoyed this evening with you, Bella." Her eyes flickered between his as he stepped closer to her, his hands resting on her waist and his forehead lowered to hers. "I have too." Edward's hand stroked along her sides from her ribs to her hips, and she trembled at his touch, her gaze locked on the flutter of his lashes as he closed his eyes. "I would really like to kiss you right now." "Then why don't you?" Bella whispered, brushing her nose against his. "We said we were going to take it slow," Edward replied with a hard swallow, his fingers tightening their hold on her slightly. "And I know once I start, I'm not going to want to stop." Bella closed her eyes and nodded, disappointed by his response, but she understood as well. She felt that same war within herself between taking their time and wanting to feel his arms around her, kissing him with everything in her. "Okay, we can wah." Her words were silenced by his lips meeting hers, soft but firm, and she brought her hands to rest on either side of his face. Edward's arms slid around her and pressed her body more securely against his, forcing a quiet whimper to escape her, and she lifted onto her toes to bring herself closer to him. The kiss was slow and passionate, while still tender and sweet, perfect as a first kiss should be, and she felt as if she could simply melt right into him. All too soon, he pulled away and chuckled at her muffled groan of displeasure. "It won't be our last, Bella." She opened her eyes to look into his, noticing the darkened jade color of them. He was as affected by it as she was, and that sent a gratifying flood of relief coursing through her. "Thank heavens." Edward laughed softly and lowered his head to her shoulder, and she wrapped her arms around him in a firm embrace. "I love you." His low, mumbled voice vibrated through her collarbone, and her fingers gripped the back of his jacket in response. "I love you too, Edward." Edward lifted his head and gently brushed his lips on her cheek. "Good night, Bella." Bella leaned back against the wall to support her trembling body, as she watched him make his way back down the hall. "Good night." She couldn't be sure that he even heard her whispered words, but he turned his head back to wave at her with a smile once more, before he descended the stairs and disappeared from her view. "Extremely good night," Bella muttered again and turned to unlock her door. Once inside, she moved over to her couch and flopped down upon it, staring up at the ceiling with a giddy smile on her face. She brought her hand to her cheek and moved it along her skin to her lips, losing herself in the lingering effects of his kisses for several long minutes, holding on to him for just a little bit longer. Her phone began to vibrate against her thigh from within her purse, and she lifted it up to look inside, the light from her screen illuminating the inside. She pulled it out and looked to find a text from Edward, and the smile she didn't think could grow any broader managed to do just that. "Sweet dreams, Bella Zoxo." "No doubts about that, Mr. Cullen," Bella spoke out loud, biting her lip to restrain her giggle. "Definitely, you too, Zoxo." Edward drove home that night feeling lighter than he had in as long as he could remember. He could have remained standing at Bella's door kissing her for hours until they were both breathless, but they wanted to take their time, and not rush anything that was happening between them. The evening with her had been absolutely perfect from the moment she stepped into the restaurant, instantly demolishing his irrational fear that she wouldn't show. They had agreed to move forward after all. What had he been so worried about? Bella had changed her mind so dramatically in the time between their conversation on his couch and the dance at the party. Caution had fallen to the wayside almost completely, and everything she said made perfect sense, and she was right. No matter what they did or how they proceeded, there was no way to fully avoid the talk. So was there really a point in denying themselves of what they truly desired? Edward was exceedingly glad that they'd agreed there wasn't. But what if she'd had second thoughts again? The answer to that was simple enough: he'd wait, as it was more than partially his fault that they were in that position in the first place. He was just about to reach into his pocket for his phone to text her, at least to make sure she was all right, when he spotted her coming toward him in that sexy, deep green dress. His attention was drawn to her legs as she walked, which caused the skirt to billow around her thighs with the movement until she was barely a few feet away, and he stood to greet her. She was absolutely breathtaking, and relief flowed through him at her presence. Yet, standing at her door and feeling her in his arms following their kiss, he was beyond content until he heard her return his sentiment as she held him. Then, he found it difficult to summon the will to leave her. He'd never experienced the power that those three simple words held before, when delivered in such a way, and by whom they were spoken. He could feel the sincerity in them, and it nearly knocked him off his feet, and in that moment, he was sure that she would be the woman he would love for the rest of his life. Edward had barely reached his driveway when he felt the need to have a connection with her again. He already missed her and had no idea how he was going to wait until Monday to see her. "Sweet dreams, Bella Zoxo," he texted her and made his way inside to prepare for his early morning. He wasn't exactly looking forward to church the next day, since the likelihood of seeing Kate was high, and with the way she'd been acting, he wasn't sure he wanted to. The temporary drain on his mood was alleviated moments later when his phone chimed on the nightstand as he was unbuttoning his shirt, and he looked down to find a reply from Bella. "Definitely, you too, Zoxo." Edward decided to push aside any thoughts of what the next day might bring and concentrate on the memory of his evening with her. He could smell the faint trace of her perfume lingering on the fabric of his shirt from holding her as he allowed it to fall from his shoulders. He even swore he could still taste her lip gloss from their kiss. She surrounded him even when she wasn't physically there, and it relaxed him as he settled into his bed and closed his eyes, falling asleep with her face in his mind and in his dreams. XXX. Sitting on the pew between his parents the next morning, Edward stared aimlessly at the wooden back of the one in front of him, prompting his mother to nudge his elbow with hers more than once. He'd noticed Kate's absence from service, and the looks he'd received from her family was more than a little disconcerting. The sermon dragged on for what felt like an eternity before they could finally rise and make their way to the doors in the back. Edward felt almost suffocated and drew in several deep breaths of the damp, bitter air the instant he was outside, until his mother came to his side and laced her arm through his. "How long have you known, sweetheart?" Esme asked gently, and Edward's head spun toward her with widened eyes. "About Kate. Her family isn't taking the news very well." Edward lowered his gaze to the ground with her clarification and slid his free hand into his pocket. "A while. I wasn't aware that she'd said anything." "So, before the engagement?" she inquired, and he drew in a deep breath, nodding in response. "Oh, Edward, then why? Why would you do that?" "It's a long story, Mom, and not one that I even fully understand now, so explaining it would be difficult," Edward replied as he rolled his neck against the building tension there. "It was a mistake, and one that almost cost me dearly in so many ways." Esme studied his expression as he spoke, and gently squeezed his bicep with her fingers. "Come to the house for lunch and we can talk." Edward sighed and nodded, relenting to his mother's request and walking her to their car, waiting for Carlisle to join them before moving over to his own. He could hear the line of questioning that was bound to come his way, and he wasn't sure how he would respond to any of it. His parents had never been ones to be judgmental with their son or anyone else, but with the situation he'd presented them with, he couldn't be entirely sure of what their full reaction would be. When he pulled into the driveway behind them, Carlisle never said a word and immediately walked into the house, disappearing quickly into his office. "Great. So now Dad is angry?" Edward groaned, rubbing his hands roughly over his face, after removing his coat just inside the door. "No, he's not angry, Edward, not at all," Esme replied and ran her hand over his back before leading him to the kitchen. "He doesn't understand why you did this, nor do I, but neither of us are angry with you, honey. And you know how your father is. Whenever he doesn't know exactly what to do or say about any given situation, he locks himself in that office until he can figure it out. Like father, like son." Edward settled onto a stool at the breakfast bar and shook his head defensively with a raised eyebrow. "I don't have an office, Mom, and I don't do that. Perhaps not in the same manner, but you aren't exactly forthcoming with your feelings either. You hide from anything that you don't know how to handle, and you bury it all in your writing. You always have ever since you were a boy," Esme said as she set the coffee pot to brew and checked on the slow cooker. The aroma of her pot roast filled the kitchen and caused Edward's stomach to clench. God, he missed his mother's cooking. "Your father and I love you very much, and we will always be proud of you, no matter what. I just want you to be honest with me, baby. Were you marrying Kate because you were? Do you have something to tell us as well?" Edward's eyes widened for a moment, but relaxed just as quickly as he watched his mother's heart breaking right before him. He knew exactly how much his parents loved him, and unconditionally as well. Nothing ever would or could change that. Even if he were to tell her exactly what she was anticipating, he had no doubt about that. But he'd always been able to tell them anything, even if it took him a while to come around to it, and that he might have felt the need to hide something so important from them was devastating his mother. He reached across the counter to where she stood and took hold of her hand, feel her brace herself for his response. "No, Mom, I'm not gay." A gust of air left her in a rush, and she lowered her forehead to the back of his hand, squeezing his fingers gently with hers. "Are you sure? You know you'd never have to lie to us about that, right? Nothing could ever make you less my son than you have been since the moment you were born." "Yes, I'm sure, Mom. I wouldn't lie about that, and I think my girlfriend would notice if I was, as well," Edward replied, and watched as Esme's head rose sharply to gaze at him. "Girlfriend? You have a girlfriend?" she asked, tilting her head with a creased brow. "Sort of, I think. I mean, I want to believe so. We just had our first date last night, so I don't know if we're exactly labeling it yet," Edward stammered nervously as Esme came around the car to sit beside him, instantly reclaiming his hand in hers. "But I am so crazy about her." Edward spent the next several minutes trying to describe Bella to his mother without making her sound too otherworldly, as she seemed to him at times. Her dark brown eyes that still appeared to hold so much light within them, the way her smile and laugh had such a tranquil effect on him, and how he already couldn't imagine his world without her after one night, one date, one kiss. "I think I need to meet this woman," Esme said as he finished, drawing his attention back to her again, and he shook his head with pleading eyes. "Edward, in the 27 years of your life, I have never seen you talk about anyone the way you just spoke of this young woman. I'm your mother and I love you, and I would like to meet her. I think you should invite her over for Christmas dinner." Mom, she has family, too. I can't just drop this on her at the last minute. It's only next week, Edward replied, gazing at his mother in disbelief. Unless there's some nefarious reason why I shouldn't meet her? Esme asked challengingly. Edward shook his head even though she'd already kissed his cheek before he could reply, as if she knew the answer. But it is still extremely short notice. It wouldn't hurt to ask, Esme replied, pouring them both a cup of coffee. And if she has plans already, we can figure something else out. But I do want to meet this woman who has had this kind of effect on my baby. XXX. Just by the sound of her voice over the phone that night, there was no denying that Bella was nervous. She was more than a little surprised when he informed her about Kate. But it was the last thing on her mind the moment he told her that his mother wanted her to come over to meet the family. Edward tried to assure her that she had nothing to worry about. However, he knew that Esme Cullen could be a force to be reckoned with when it came to her only child, no matter what age he might have been. And of course, how overwhelming his family could be. Bella surprisingly agreed to come over to meet them, and made her best effort to appear calm throughout the entire week leading up to it. The morning of Christmas, Edward found himself anxious, praying that all would go smoothly as he awaited her phone call to tell him that she was on her way. It came just after 1 o'clock, and then he couldn't stop pacing by the front door. Would they see the same amazing woman he did in Bella? And if they did, would his mother welcome her or bring the mama bear out? He hoped for the first, since Esme was an inherently kind woman and wouldn't be outwardly cruel, but that knowledge in the back of his mind of how protective she was of him reared up again. The instant Edward heard Bella's car pull up, he swung the door open and walked out to greet her. He wanted to have a moment alone with her before bringing her inside, as there was no telling when the next opportunity might be for either of them. She smiled at him nervously as she stood and his eyes ran over her. She was dressed casually in a pair of dark wash jeans and a black turtleneck sweater, and the heels of her boots clicked against the pavement as she made her way toward him. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard by getting all dressed up, but now, I'm feeling a bit overly dressed down, Bella said as she gazed at him in his shirt and tie. I had church this morning, Edward answered her with a chuckle, resting his hands on her waist and brushing a soft kiss on her lips. You're perfect. Merry Christmas. Bella relaxed at his touch, and her smile grew more genuine. Merry Christmas, Bella. We're so glad you could make it. Esme's voice came from the doorway, and they both turned to find her coming down the steps toward them. It's so wonderful to meet you. It's nice to meet you too, Mrs. Cullen, Bella replied, shaking his mother's extended hand. Please come in. Carlisle will be down shortly, once he's finished with his family phone calls, Esme said, gesturing to the house and walking on the other side of Edward. She's cute. Edward chuckled softly and wrapped his arm around Bella's shoulders as she lowered her chin in embarrassment. He felt her tense again once they stepped inside and were met with the commotion of conversation echoing from the living room. Uncle Edward. Before Edward could even turn his head toward the screeching voice, a little girl with curly blonde hair collided with his leg, wrapping her arms tightly around it. Hey, Munchkin, what's up? You just saw me 2 minutes ago. I know, but Josh won't let me play. Go beat him up, she ordered, pointing toward the next room. Edward was visibly restraining laughter as he lifted her off the floor and into his arms. Is it his toy? Yes, but Mommy always says we need to share, she replied matter-of-factly, pursing her tiny lips. Okay, let's go see what's going on, Edward spoke softly to her, kissing her forehead. I thought you were an only child, Bella whispered curiously, gazing at the little girl, and then to Edward. I am. Brianna here is my cousin Rosalie's daughter, Edward explained quietly as they moved toward the living room. Uncle is just a little less confusing for them. Bella gave a small nod of understanding, but then sucked in a sharp breath at the sight of a room full of people. Wow, this isn't your whole family. Not quite. Mostly just the ones on this coast, or on this continent, Edward replied, settling Brianna on his hip and sliding his free arm around Bella's waist. Just relax, you'll be fine. Tattletale, Joshua exclaimed from the floor, and Brianna stuck her tongue out at him. The room silenced and all eyes turned toward Edward and Bella, and he felt her shift into his side. There was close to 20 people surrounding them, uncles and aunts, cousins and their children. He guided her slowly through the crowd of people, and the volume in the room gradually increased once again as he made introductions, ending in the kitchen. A pair of piercing blue eyes met them as they entered, and the statuesque blonde owner began walking toward them. What trouble are my children rousing now? Mommy, Josh is being mean to me, Brianna exclaimed with large alligator tears forming in her eyes as she reached out for her mother. Daddy and Uncle Edward too. I know, boys are so mean, aren't they? The woman teased and hugged the child to her, but her gaze remained on Bella. Rosalie, I'd like you to meet my girlfriend, Bella, Edward said, giving Bella's side a gentle, reassuring squeeze. Oh good, we need more females around here, Rosalie replied with a laugh, her smile growing warm and kind, much like Essen's. She secured her hold on the little girl with one arm, and extended her hand to Bella. It's nice to meet you. Please excuse my daughter, she's a bit theatrical. Nothing like her mother at all, Edward whispered sarcastically in Bella's ear, laughing when Rosalie released Bella's hand and lightly swatted the side of his head. Only speaking the truth, Rosie. Aunt Esme, do something about your child, Rosalie called across the kitchen, and Esme only laughed with a shaking head. Some help, you are. See, we need more sane women around here, Bella. Bella chuckled softly and glanced around the room, closing her eyes as Edward pressed his lips to her temple. You out. Man, free zone in here. But I'm keeping your girlfriend, Rosalie said, linking her arm with Bella's, and nodding toward the kitchen doorway with her gaze locked on Edward. The movement of Bella's hand taking his caught her attention, and she caught the nervous, wide-eyed expression on the woman's face. Don't worry, Bella, we don't bite. I'll be back to save you in a half hour, Edward whispered as he kissed Bella's cheek. A lot can happen in 30 minutes, Bella rasped, attempting to pull him close to her again. Rosalie laughed, and Edward felt Bella's face bury into his shoulder. That is very true. This one was conceived in far less than 30 minutes. Rose, Esme called from across the kitchen, but Rosalie appeared unfazed as she bounced the child on her hip. There are little ears in the room, and you are my niece and I love you, but some things your aunt doesn't need to know either. Or your cousin, for that matter, Edward added with a mock shudder, and straightened to look at Rosalie. Don't traumatize her. Rosalie scoffed and rolled her eyes. Please, I already like her more than I like you. Edward jokingly sneered at her before his smile returned, his gaze moving back to Bella. I'm just going to change and find my dad, that's all. Bella took a deep breath and nodded, hesitantly releasing his hand. Okay? Edward hastened his steps the moment he was out of the kitchen, anxious to do just that, so he could return to Bella. After witnessing his family's response to her, he felt confident that his mother and Rosalie would have her feeling more comfortable in no time. However, his family could even be overwhelming for him at times, and he didn't want to leave her alone any longer than he absolutely had to. If I wasn't nervous enough before, I definitely am now, Bella thought as she offered a weak smile to the two women and child staring at her in what seemed like evaluation. The Cullen family had been far more welcoming than she had expected, but standing there with his mother, cousin, and the little girl who all obviously adored him in immense measure, did not help to quell her anxiousness. She was still somewhat reeling from the sheer size of his family, having grown up with just her and her father most of her life, but the three occupants of that room shook her most of all. Bella, you have nothing to worry about. Please sit down, Rosalie said, settling her daughter into the booster seat at the table and placing a box of crayons in front of her. Edward has been talking about you non-stop all week. We've really been looking forward to meeting you. Coffee? Bella chuckled uncomfortably and made her way across the kitchen to sit across from them, shaking her head. Caffeine was the last things she needed. No, thank you. I'm good. Rosalie gave a soft laugh when Bella's head spun toward the doorway at the sound of raucous laughter from the living room. We are a bit much to take, I guess. After a while, you just get used to it. But I assure you, none of us are opposed to you and Edward if that's something you're worried about. Bella attempted to dispute it, but in all actuality, she had been concerned about that. It wasn't just anyone she was dealing with, this was his family, and Kate had been part of their circle for years, and she'd wondered if she would be seen as the intruder. Edward had assured her that they knew most of what had happened with the engagement after Kate spoke with her family, but it still might have seemed really soon to be bringing a new girlfriend home for the holiday. Honestly, I couldn't stand that woman ever since we were kids, and I never understood Edward's devotion to her at all, Rosalie began, and caught the gaze Esme was directing at her over her shoulder. Sorry, Auntie, but it's true. She's vile, and used him, and it just never made sense. Edward has always been way too good for that. It's nice to see that he's finally smartened up. Please excuse Rosalie. She didn't come equipped with a fully functional edit button, Esme said, setting a tray of muffins in the center of the table and leaning toward Bella's ear. Even though, I don't disagree with her at all. Bella's eyes shifted between them in surprise, struck momentarily speechless by the serious expressions on their faces, before she finally found her voice again. I thought she was a family friend? Rosalie took a sip of her coffee and shook her head. No, Edward is family and she was his friend. That was the entire extent of it. We loved him enough to tolerate her. It's a relief to see more of the carefree Edward again, since he started seeing you. It's been way too long since we've seen him smile like this. Esme nodded in agreement, blinking her misted eyes. It really has. I was sure we'd lost him completely when he announced that engagement. So you, my dear, are a breath of fresh air. Well, Bella breathed out before she could stop herself and rendered questioning looks from not only Rosalie and Esme, but Brianna as well. She dragged her sweaty palms over her thighs and lowered her eyes, but no one else broke the silence. I guess I just thought you'd see me as the wicked witch butting into your little circle. You not a witch, Bella, Brianna chimed in, and all three women looked at her, watching the tiny curls of her hair bounce as she shook her head. You pink, not green. The innocent remark momentarily broke even Bella's tension, and she laughed without reservation. The women fell into easy conversation, and she found herself becoming more relaxed in their presence. It still felt odd to be among a family that never seemed to cease to have something to talk or laugh about, with the way she and her father had always been so reserved, but it was undeniably nice. Before she knew it, the 30 minutes had passed and Bella was so caught up in the discussion that she was startled by a pair of hands coming to rest on her shoulders. She glanced behind her to find Edward there, smiling down at her. Have they started with the horror stories yet? Of course not, sweetheart, Esme answered with a broad grin. That's for after dinner. Yeah, when we can break out the photo albums, Rosalie added, causing Edward to groan. Great, he retorted sarcastically, but Bella noticed that his smile never wavered. Bella, I'd like you to meet my father Carlisle. Dad, this is my Bella. Bella rose from her chair to greet the tall, blonde man standing beside Edward. Is there anyone in this family that isn't uncommonly good-looking? Bella mused to herself as she held her hand out to him. Hello, Mr. Cullen. It's a pleasure to meet you. We've heard quite a lot about you, Carlisle answered quietly, and she instantly saw so much of Edward in him, aside from physical attributes. He was very soft-spoken, almost shy, it seemed, but he also appeared gentle and kind in his eyes and warm smile. And the way he gazed at his wife and bent down to kiss her cheek, and Esme's loving reception of the gesture, warmed Bella's heart. They were obviously still very much in love after so many years. Mommy, I hate this, Brianna exclaimed, throwing her crayon down on the table, and roughly crossing her arms over her chest. Okay, someone's getting whiny. Think it's time for a nap, Rosalie said as she stood, lifting her flailing daughter into her arms. Brianna Elizabeth, don't make me get your dad. Brianna instantly stilled and rested her head on her mother's shoulder, her lip quivering and her fist rubbing her eye. The dad card works every time, Edward muttered and leaned closer to Bella, even though he's the biggest damn marshmallow in this entire family. Rosalie shushed him harshly, but was visibly restraining her smile as she carried her daughter out of the room. They all jumped at the sound of her screeching voice down the hall, following a large crash from the living room. Emmett McCarty, Aunt Esme is going to kick your hind end straight into the new year. Both Esme and Carlisle hurried out of the kitchen, leaving Edward and Bella alone, and she relaxed back against him as he slid his arms around her waist. His lips pressed to her temple, and she could feel his smile stretch against her skin as his mother began admonishing Emmett for breaking a lamp. Overwhelmed yet? A little. Not in a bad way, but definitely not something I'm used to. You've met Charlie, Bella replied with a soft laugh, tracing her fingertips along his forearm as he nodded. When you said you had a large family, I guess I just didn't imagine it was this large. I have one first cousin that I haven't seen since I was about 4. You have at least a dozen, so this is very different for me, but everyone is so great. Edward stilled at the drop of her voice and tilted his face forward a little to gaze at her. That's a bad thing? Bella shook her head and looked at him, pressing his arm more securely against her abdomen. No, not at all. It's actually the most amazing thing I've ever seen. You're so different with them as well, and that definitely isn't a bad thing. You're relaxed, you have fun and talk. I've always wondered what it was like to have a large family that carried on actual conversations with one another. I love my dad, and we have a great relationship for what it is, but the Swan house was always very quiet. I'm too much like my dad. I don't think that will ever change. Bella, Edward murmured, turning her in his arms to face him. and cupped his hands on either side of her jaw. I don't want you to change, so don't ever feel that you need to be loud like Emmett, or opinionated like Rosalie, or ostentatious like Brianna, or anything like any of my relatives to fit in here. I fell in love with this woman right here, exactly as you are, so you don't have to change in order to make me happy. You do that every day without even trying. She smiled up at him. When you say things like that, you make me forget that I'm supposed to be mad at you for leaving me alone down here, Bella teased as she slid her arms around his waist and lifted onto her toes to reach his lips, brushing them softly with hers, before they quirked up with a smile. My Bella? Edward lowered his head to her shoulder and she lightly stroked his back with her hand as she felt the heat of his face radiate through to her skin. I meant to say my girlfriend, Bella, but word vomit is my specialty, apparently. Bella laughed and hugged her arms around him, lightly kissing his neck. I really like that. Made me feel special in a strange way. Edward lifted his head to look at her again and pressed his lips to her forehead, tightening his arms around her. You are special, Bella, so very special. I really like that lamp too, Esme muttered as she re-entered the kitchen with Carlisle, halting when her eyes met Bella's, and her smile returned. Oh, don't mind me. Pretend I'm not even here. Carlisle walked by them as well, giving Edward a subtle wink and a smile, and then followed his wife. Don't worry, my dear, it can be easily replaced. I'm going to take Bella on a tour of the house, Edward announced and took her hand, leading her toward the doorway. Don't you wake that baby, Edward. And dinner is at 4, Esme instructed, pointing a spatula at him. That's in about 30 minutes. A lot can happen in 30 minutes, Emmett teased, wiggling his eyebrows at them as they passed him in the hallway, and earning a glare from Edward while Bella hid her face against his chest. Damn, she is just too cute. She is gonna be fun to have around here. Taking things slow sounded wise in theory. The practice of it, however, was far more difficult to rationalize. Everything else seemed to be moving forward. Edward had gotten a new job and was due to start just after the first of the year. Gossip was gradually lessening though, never disappearing, and they had spent nearly every evening after work together. And therein lay the difficulty. The stares and whispers were easy to ignore, as were the vile voicemails from Kate, blaming Edward for the demise of her relationship with not only her family, but Irina as well. Because it couldn't possibly have anything to do with her toxic personality, Bella snarled sarcastically one night after hearing bits and pieces of one of the said voicemails when Edward had to pull it away from his ear due to the screaming. He chuckled at her comment and kissed her gently, deleting the message before it had even played to completion, as he continued to do with each subsequent one from Kate. It had barely been 2 weeks into their relationship, but after 2 years of the slow escalation of yearning they'd held for one another, it felt so much longer. Every kiss grew more intense and agonizing to cease, each embrace more difficult to find a reason to part from. Even a casual evening in his living room, with her on the couch and him seated in front of her on the floor, her fingers running through his hair as they watched a movie, felt so natural and normal. Neither of them wanted to even think about having to say goodnight, but she could feel it coming and only half paid attention to what was happening on the screen. Do you really have to leave the paper? Bella murmured suddenly, and he tilted his head back on her lap to look at her, and she sighed. I know you do. I just can't believe it's only 3 days away. We're hardly going to see each other for a while, and that's a difficult concept to grasp, especially since I've already gotten so accustomed to seeing you all the time. Edward shifted his body to kneel between her feet, the movie long forgotten as he gazed up at her with his hands resting on her hips. Baby, we've talked about this. Not much is really going to change since we can't exactly spend the kind of time together that we'd like to at work anyway. I won't be so far away that we can't meet for lunch or something. It's not the quantity of time we spend together, but making the most of every moment that we do. And I know I definitely intend to do that. Bella's smile returned as his voice deepened mischievously, and his lips met hers, their arms encircling each other and pressing their bodies more firmly together. She loved how relaxed they'd become with one another, the freedom they felt to express their mutual affection and desire for the other. Yet, she wanted more, and it seemed as if he did as well when his hands slipped beneath the hem of her shirt, his warm skin touching hers. Stay here with me tonight, Bella, he whispered against her lips, his fingers pressing firmly against her back to secure her body against his. Nothing has to happen. I just really don't want to let you go tonight. Bella opened her eyes to gaze at him, finding his still closed and his features tight and nervous, as if fearing that she might actually say no. She lifted her hand to trace her fingertips along his cheek to his jaw, kissing him gently with a smile broadening on her lips. "I'll need a t-shirt to wear then." Edward sighed heavily in relief and buried his face in her neck, groaning when her legs folded around his waist and pulled him closer. He kissed along her throat as she leaned sideways on the couch to lie down, guiding him up and over her body until he settled above her. "Bella, I know you said nothing has to happen tonight," Bella whispered breathily, threading her fingers in his hair as her other arm tightened around his shoulders. "But can it?" Edward froze and lifted his head to look down at her face, and her eyes held his without a single trace of nervousness or hesitation. "What about taking things slow?" "That is an extremely overrated philosophy," she answered with another soft kiss to his lips. "I've wanted you for so long, it already feels like we've been waiting forever." He drew in a slow, uneven breath as his knuckles ghosted along her cheek. "You're sure?" "My desire for you has never been in question, Edward," she replied with a slow shake of her head, her nails dragging softly along his scalp. "Only whether it was reciprocated or not." "You know it is," Edward murmured softly, brushing his lips over hers. "Always has been." Bella reached above her head to the end table for the remote and clicked off the television, setting the device back on the surface and returning her arm around Edward's shoulders. "I'm ready to go to bed." Edward gazed at her for a moment, unmoving as he observed the look in her eyes. There was no reluctance there, only the want and desire that matched his own. He kissed her gently and rose to his feet, holding his hand out to her, and Bella slipped her fingers into it, and they made their way up the stairs to his room. Once they were standing beside his bed, Edward turned to her and took her face between his hands, lowering his lips to hers once again in a slow, passionate kiss. He wanted her desperately, but he didn't wish to cheapen what was about to happen between them by rushing and only chasing gratification. They'd both ached for this for so long, and there was no need to hurry. Bella's body melted against him, and he felt her clinging to the back of his shirt, clearly attempting to pull him closer. Her head arched back and broke the kiss, as his hand rose to remove the tie holding her hair back, the soft locks falling from the ponytail and cascading down over her shoulders. Edward's eyes ran over her reverently, tracing his fingertips over the skin of her cheek and jaw, and finally lacing into the strands gently. "I love you." "I love you too," Bella whispered just as softly, drawing her hand between them and running them from his abdomen to his chest. His shirt rose with the movement, and together, they lifted it over his head and dropped it to the floor. "I want you." A groan echoed in Edward's throat and vibrated against her lips, as she guided his face with her hands, pulling him into another kiss. His arms encircled her waist, and he lifted her up, feeling her ankles link at the base of his spine. When her legs wrapped around him, he lowered her onto the bed and settled his body on top of her, parting his lips to deepen the kiss. Bella gave a soft, high-pitched whimper as she reciprocated, her fingers moving to the buttons of her shirt to begin unfastening it. She sighed when his hand covered hers to halt her movements, and opened her eyes to look up at him. "You want to do this part?" "As a matter of fact, I do, Miss Swan," Edward replied with a smile growing on his lips, kissing her gently and continuing to her neck, throat, and between the parted fabric of her shirt. Bella's fingers worked through his hair as he slowly worked each button all the way down her torso, ending with the pop of the one on her jeans. "Impatient to see this gorgeous body of yours?" Edward mumbled against her abdomen, placing an open-mouthed kiss there, and sucking lightly at her skin as he lowered the zipper. "Definitely." Bella chuckled and lifted her hips, allowing him to guide the denim down her legs. The light scruff along his jaw tickled the inside of her thigh and her knee bent in reflex, her breath halting as his lips pressed to her ankle bone once free from the clothing. Edward rose to kneel between her parted legs, holding his hands out to her and lifting her up to sit in front of him. She shrugged her shoulders as he guided her shirt over them and down her arms, discarding it to the floor as well to join the growing pool of their clothes. He watched her lie back again, running his eyes along every inch of smooth, bare skin exposed to him, only covered now by her bra and panties. Bella rested her foot on his thigh, slowly gliding it over the leg of his pants, and holding his gaze, until her eyes fell to where his fingers were unfastening the button at his waist. "Are you cold?" Edward asked when her entire body trembled, and she smiled, shaking her head briskly and reaching out to him. He shed his pants and kicked them from his feet, and then lowered his body over her again, feeling a slight chill to her skin. "You sure about that?" "Okay, maybe a little, but not anymore," she replied and snaked her arms around his neck, humming in contentment when their lips met again. Edward's hand slipped beneath her and lifted her enough to pull the blanket down with the other, covering them over. They settled into the mattress again, and her hips rolled up to his anxiously. He moaned at the pleasurable friction it caused and unhooked the clasp of her bra, sliding it from between them. Once she'd retracted her arms from the straps, only his boxers and her underwear remained between them, and her back arched to press their chests more firmly together. Her arms wrapped around his shoulders, holding him to her as their lips moved fluidly with one another. He felt her grip tighten on him, when his hardened length glided against her with the shift of his hips, and she panted heavily as their kiss parted and pleaded with a breathy voice, "Edward, please." Edward rose and they divested themselves of the last of their garments and then began reaching over to his bedside table drawer, but she stopped him. "You know I'm on the pill and I trust you," Bella whispered and weaved her fingers with his. Naturally, they'd had that discussion and knew that neither of them had been with anyone else in quite some time, but he'd prepared just in case. "If it's okay with you, I don't want anything between us. I just want to feel you." Edward settled on top of her again, and she stared up into his eyes as their lips touched. She bit down on her lower lip as he began to press inside her slowly, her breath staggered while she molded around him. Her grip secured on his hand once he filled her completely, exhaling sharply while they both adjusted to the sensation of their joined bodies. Once he felt her muscles gradually relax, he pressed his lips to her neck and retracted his hips, her moan blending with his when he glided forward again. Bella's breath fluttered over his collarbone as their bodies began slowly and rhythmically rocking together, and her fingertips dragged along his shoulder blade to his lower back. Her head turned to brush a kiss to his dampened brow, and his face lifted from her neck, her lips gently claiming his as her knee bent at his side. Edward's hand moved along the back of her thigh and returned to her hip, squeezing lightly as he traced her lower lip with his tongue. If he hadn't already known how deeply in love with her he was, there wasn't a doubt in his mind that it would have bowled him over in that moment. He could feel it in every touch, hear it in every sound. She was everything to him and always would be. Bella murmured his name and her head arched back into the pillow, pinching her eyes closed and her mouth parting. His hips drove more insistently against her, and she brought her fingers to his hair, scratching her nails lightly on his scalp, and keeping his lips sealed to her throat. Edward could feel his own climax building along with hers, not ready for it to end, but knowing they still had plenty of time to still share together. "I love you, Bella." "Love you," Bella panted in reply to his nearly grown statement, as their bodies tensed against one another in mutual release. Edward's head settled on her chest as he paused to catch his breath, listening to her heart pound rapidly, while her fingers continued to stroke through his hair in slow contrast. "I don't want to move, but I don't want to crush you either." Bella laughed softly and brushed her lips against his forehead. "You won't, I promise." Bella shifted in the bed the next morning, smiling before she even opened her eyes at the feel of the warm body beside her and the strong arms still wrapped around her shoulders. The night before couldn't have more perfect if it had been planned and scripted that way. She'd gone over with the intent of spending a quiet Saturday night with him, having dinner and watching movies before returning home, as she did after every other date. Yet, the instant he asked her to stay, with his body pressed so close to hers, she knew what she wanted. But did he? Especially with that assurance from him that nothing had to happen between them that night. Was he not ready for that? That question was answered quite clearly when he rose from above her and held out his hand for hers, leading her up the stairs to his bedroom. Any and all nervousness she might have felt before then flew out the window the moment he took her face between his hands as they stood beside his bed and kissed her. It wasn't feverish or devouring, but it wasn't tame, timid or shy. His kiss was tender, yet purposeful and undeniably toe-curling. That one kiss fanned the fire smoldering within her, and set it blazing with white-hot intensity. Sex, for all its intents and purposes, had never really been bad for Bella in the instances she'd actually experienced it. But it had never felt like that. She couldn't quite explain it either. Edward wasn't gargantuan in size or possessing some acrobatic skill that had her orgasming on contact like some of the romance novels she'd read. Yet, it really was the best sex of her life. Bella still felt warm and more relaxed than she had in ages, and her skin tingled, as if clinging to the memory of the sensation of his body over hers. She found comfort in the rise and fall of the chest beneath her head, wanting to bury her face against it to block out the too bright light, trying to invade through her lids. Finally, Bella opened her eyes and blinked several times to clear her vision, gazing at the reason for all the brightness. The sun reflected off the freshly fallen snow, flakes still floating down rapidly and collecting along the windowsill. drifting up along the edges of the square panes of glass. She tugged the blanket up over her shoulder and snuggled against that warm, muscular body again. Edward, she thought with a smile, and tilted her head up to look at him. Still asleep and face turned to the other side. Part of her wanted to wake him with kisses along that angular jaw or those smooth lips of his, while yet another simply desired to watch him for a little longer as he slept. She knew that once he woke, they would likely need to move from that bed, and she was in no rush to leave the warmth engulfing her. "What time is it?" Edward's deep, morning voice mumbled, though his eyes remained closed. Bella snuggled closer to him and shook her head, hugging her arm around his abdomen more securely. "No idea, and I'm way too comfortable right now to bring myself to move." Edward laughed and it rumbled beneath her ear. He brought his other arm around her, and she felt his lips pressed to her hair. "It's 9:30, baby. Aren't you hungry?" "If it means getting out of this bed and freezing my ass off, then nope, not at all," Bella muttered into his chest. Edward turned onto his side to face her and lifted her leg to wrap around his hip, trailing his hand around hers. "That would be a damn shame. It's such a cute ass." Bella rolled her eyes and lightly swatted his back, but laughed as she burrowed into him. "And you are such a man. You would say that." "Why? Because I admire and appreciate every inch of my girlfriend's beautiful body?" Edward replied, tilting her face up with his fingertips and meeting her lips with his in a soft kiss. His arm tightened around her, and she shifted her leg from around him to slip between his, her body pressing more firmly against him. A moan echoed in his throat, and his fingers weaved into her tangled hair, his other hand pulling her hips closer to his. "I agree. Let's not get up until tomorrow." Bella felt his length harden against her lower abdomen, and her fingers gripped his shoulder, her nails indenting into his skin. "I could definitely live with that plan." Edward smirked and sealed his lips over hers, and then sighed when his phone began to ring downstairs. "Shit, that's probably my mother, wondering where I am." "Oh, it's Sunday," Bella answered softly, running her hand down his arm. "Were you supposed to go this morning or something?" Edward hummed and kissed her forehead before rolling onto his back and lifting the covers off him. "But she still calls to check. She's determined to make a choir boy out of me yet." Bella turned onto her stomach to watch him dress, noting the amused look on his face as he spoke. "I think last night alone would negate her efforts." Edward barked out a laugh as he tugged his pants up over his hips, facing her again, and leaning down onto the bed to kiss her. "I've never claimed to be an angel. Be right back. She'll start worrying if I don't answer." "I'll be right here," Bella replied, burying her face in the pillow again, and pulling the covers over her head. She listened to his footsteps exiting the room and thumping down the stairs, and then lowered the comforter to her chin, and shifted his pillow beneath her head. How she wished she could wake up every morning that way, with Edward beside her, kissing and touching her, wrapped in the security of his arms. After one night of sleeping next to him, she knew her own bed would never feel the same. Even at that moment, with him absent from his bed, it felt colder, and she ran her leg over his spot in an attempt to retain the hint of lingering warmth from his body. "Yeah, I'm spending the day with Bella, Mom," Edward's gentle voice sounded, and Bella turned her head to look at him as he entered the room, holding the phone to his ear. "I know, the roads are bad out there. We won't be going anywhere, I promise." Bella's jaw dropped as he winked at her, muffling her embarrassed laugh in the pillow. "I'll tell her." "Love you too, Mom," Edward said, ending the call and climbing back onto the bed behind her. "My mother says hello, and she's looking forward to seeing you again, pillow thief." "Move your feet, lose your seat," Bella muttered in reply as he pulled her hair back and brushed a kiss on her neck, or spot on the bed, as it were. Edward chuckled against her skin and slid his arm around her middle. "It seems you've made quite an impression on my entire family, baby. Even the kids are asking when you're coming back." "Really?" Bella asked, turning her head to look at him with a creased brow. "That surprises you?" "They adored you, Bella," Edward replied, cupping her cheek with his hand, and kissing her gently, "though winning over Brianna is quite a feat. She doesn't like anyone when it comes to her Uncle Edward." Bella actually had noticed how fiercely the little girl had hovered around Edward once she woke up from her nap on Christmas, and the way he doted on Brianna all evening conjured images in Bella's mind of how he would be with his own children someday. He was so calm and gentle with her, and never complained once about her demand that he play Barbies with her for hours. Edward entertained her every whim, and if he would have any fault as a father himself when the time came, it might be that his kids would be spoiled rotten. Bella had halted her thoughts before they could take shape that day. Everything was still so fresh and new with them, and it was too soon to be thinking on anything like that. Yet, lying there in his arms, on his bed and never wanting to leave, she couldn't stop. She could envision all those things with him in the future: marriage, children, building a life together, and after only 3 weeks of even knowing how they felt about one another. "Edward, do you ever feel like we're moving too fast?" Edward's hand stilled where it had lowered to run along her abdomen, and he rose onto his elbow to gaze down at her. "No, why? Do you?" Bella rolled onto her back and he shifted to accommodate her, and she brought her eyes to look into his. "No, I really don't, and that in itself seems a little strange. I mean, I've already stayed the night with you, met your family and spent a holiday with them. Things like that could take months in a relationship, especially one that was intended to go slow. But I want these things with you and it feels right, to me, at least, no matter how little sense it makes for it to." Edward traced her flushed cheek with the pad of his thumb. "You're not as alone as you seem to think you are, Bella. I think about these things, too." "Oh really?" Bella asked disbelievingly, her eyebrow arched in challenge. "Like what?" "Like that big white house with the blue shutters for sale up the road a bit?" he began, guiding her body toward him more, and she nodded. "The other day, I drove by and thought about how perfect it would be for us to buy something like that together one day." Bella pulled her head back to look at him more fully, taking in his serious expression. "What's wrong with this one?" "Nothing, except there's only one bedroom. No room for expansion, should anyone else join us someday. That one is just a bit closer to the school. Bigger yard, 2-car garage, newly remodeled 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. "Wait, you looked at the listing?" Bella gasped with wide eyes, and it was his turn to break his gaze from hers, and he shrugged. "Only glanced. Freaked out yet?" Edward asked softly, his hand running along her side. "Shocking as it may be, no, I'm not," Bella replied, surprising even herself. "You really think about that already? Like needing more bedrooms and all?" "Bella, these are things I've thought about since the moment you told me you loved me," Edward answered, and brought his eyes back to hers. "How much I wanted it all with you, if I ever had the chance. And I've known from our first date that you are the one that I want to spend my life with, and everything that's happened since has only solidified that. Sometimes, you just know, you know." Bella chuckled softly at his last statement, but nodded in agreement. "Yeah, I know, I really do." Edward lifted his hand to take hers on his shoulder, bringing it to his lips, and kissing her knuckles. "My future is with you, Isabella Swan." "And mine is with you, Edward Cullen," she responded with a smile as their fingers wove together. "Now, I think you should get back under these covers with me and not move until tomorrow, like you promised." "My pleasure, beautiful," Edward answered with a smile, sliding beneath the blankets and pulling her against him. "I need my pillow back, though." Millimeter, nope, community property. "What's yours is mine," Bella said, shaking her head and pinching her lips together in an attempt to refrain from laughing. She shrieked when he took her hands and held them over her head, rolling her onto her back and pinning her to the bed. "See, what do you need a pillow for right now?" "Smooth, baby, very smooth," Edward replied with playfully narrowed eyes, and then sealed his lips over hers. Bella made her way to the front door of the Cullen house, muffled voices and music audible from the outside. A week before, she had been blown away by the volume of what she had assumed would be subdued, quiet church-going people, but after Christmas, she was quickly made aware that was far from the case. They were good people and obviously cared deeply about one another, but she didn't think the word quiet existed in their vocabulary as a whole, outside of church. And New Year's Eve was apparently no exception. She knocked on the front door, and when no one answered, she began searching each side for a doorbell button, and pressed it twice. "I got it," a loud voice called out, and the door swung open, revealing Emmett on the other side. "Jingle bells, you're here." Bella laughed and rolled her eyes as he pulled her into a hug, squeezing her tightly. "You realize that after tonight, that name really has to go, right?" "Oh, don't you worry. I'll come up with something else by the end of the evening," Emmett replied with a grin, setting her feet back down on the ground. "Come on in. Edward's around here somewhere." "Hey, Beanpole, you still indisposed?" "Okay, so maybe Emmett's volume would still take some getting used to," Bella thought while he helped her out of her jacket, her ear ringing from his yelling for Edward right beside it. Yet, aside from Esmond Carlyle, Rosalie and Emmett were among her favorites within the Cullen family. While everyone had made her feel very welcome there for Christmas, they hadn't treated her like a newcomer at all. It was as if she'd been part of their family for years rather than hours, and that feeling hadn't dissipated. It was unfamiliar territory for Bella to be so comfortable with anyone. But Emmett's hug hadn't felt strange, nor did the ease with which he teased her. "Thank you, Emmett. I really didn't need my hearing in that ear anyway." Emmett only laughed as he hung up her jacket and returned to her to guide her into the living room. "Hey, where's Edward?" "I'm right here, Emmett," Edward replied from behind them, and Bella turned to face him, smiles gracing both of their expressions. "Good evening, beautiful." "Hi," Bella replied softly, stepping toward him and into his waiting arms. "Hope you remembered to wash your hands," Emmett teased, and Bella laughed into Edward's chest. "Emmett," he growled and secured his hold around her. "You said you'd behave tonight." "This is me behaving, Eddie boy. It is just way too much fun to watch Bella blush," Emmett replied with a laugh and tugged lightly at one of her long curls. "Oh good, you're finally here. Maybe Edward will stop moping now," Rosalie chimed in, and Bella turned to look at her. "So glad you're still putting up with him. Happy New Year, Bella." "Happy New Year, Rose," Bella answered, giving her a one-armed hug while keeping the other secured around Edward's waist. "I wasn't moping," Edward mumbled and was met with a scoff from Rosalie. Everything was exactly as it had been at Christmas, and she found some relief in that. Their relaxed teasing demeanor was something she enjoyed observing the last time, and she'd hoped it was just their natural way of being. Rosalie leaned toward her and whispered, "He was moping," and her wink set Bella's mind to rest. It was just who they were naturally. "Come on, my mom is in the kitchen and is anxious to see you," Edward said, taking her hand in his and leading her away from his laughing cousin. As they moved down the hall, Bella hugged closer to him, resting her head against his arm, and curling her free hand around his elbow. "You were moping, weren't you?" "Maybe a little," Edward replied with a chuckle and kissed the top of her head. "I missed you. And by the way, have I mentioned that green looks really good on you?" "Is it too much?" Bella whispered, glancing down at the deep emerald-colored dress she wore, and then back up to him. "No, definitely not. You're just lucky I'm surrounded by my family right now, or else nothing would save you from my wicked intent," Edward remarked, grinning before meeting her lips with his. "Who says I wish to be saved?" Bella replied with a smile of her own, squeezing his hand. "Bella," Edward groaned, drawing in a deep breath before they reached the kitchen doorway, and murmuring in her ear, "Not fair." Essen's face brightened as they entered the room, wiping her hands on a dish towel and hurrying toward them. "There she is. How are you, sweetheart?" "Good, thank you for inviting me, Mrs. Cullen," Bella replied as Essen hugged her firmly. "No need to be so formal, Bella. You can call me Essen," she said, placing her hand on Bella's cheek. "There's plenty of food and whatever you'd like to drink. Please help yourself." "Thank you, Essen," Edward joked, earning a light slap on the stomach from his mother. "It's still mom to you, young man," Essen scolded light-heartedly and returned to the stove, muttering children under her breath. After a couple flutes of champagne, Bella felt herself relaxing even more, able to join in with the conversation surrounding them at the dinner table and afterward in the living room. Even in the presence of his family, Edward still couldn't seem to keep himself from touching her in some way, whether it was his hand on her knee or his fingers lightly tracing along the skin of her neck, with his arm draped behind her on the couch. It appeared to be a family trait she was noticing more in that visit, even with those only married into it. Each couple was extremely affectionate with one another, regardless of how long they'd been married or dating, so it didn't feel odd for her to lean into Edward's side or even share an occasional kiss, and no one else seemed to find it out of the ordinary either. "I love you," Edward whispered softly in her ear just before midnight, and Bella turned her gaze to him, closing her eyes as he pressed his lips to her forehead. "I'm so glad you're here tonight, baby." "I love you too," Bella replied and giggled when he began nuzzling her cheek in down to her neck. "How much champagne have you had tonight, and are you going to be okay to drive?" Edward shook his head and hummed in response. "Nope, you'll have to carry me home and take care of me all night." "All part of your master plan?" Bella teased and he nodded, his laughter vibrating against her skin. "You're an expert manipulator, Edward Cullen." "Thank you," Edward mumbled unabashedly and lifted his head, smiling at her. "Do you really think you need to resort to such measures for me to go home with you?" Bella asked in a soft whisper, brushing his lips with hers, and he eagerly responded, "Can't wait another minute until midnight for that," Emmett remarked, sitting down beside them and pulling Rosalie down onto his lap. "Emmett, shut up, let them enjoy it," Rosalie admonished, and then brought her gaze to Edward and Bella. "It's sweet." "Okay, everyone, it's time," Esme announced, and all eyes turned to the television, watching the ball make its final descent to ring out the year into the new one. Voices echoed through the room, counting down to 1, and a chorus of Happy New Year filled the air. Edward's eyes met Bella's, and he stroked her cheek lightly with his fingers. Happy New Year, baby, he whispered and pressed a soft kiss to her lips. Bella smiled as he pulled away and nodded. Yes, it is. Bella led Edward to his front door after driving him home, taking the keys from his hand to unlock it. Once inside, she set them in her purse on the table, just before she felt his arm slip around her waist and pull her to him. Finally, got you alone, Edward murmured, sealing his lips over hers heatedly. Bella's arms wrapped around his shoulders once her jacket hit the floor with his guidance, and returned the kiss in a way she'd been aching to all night. Every touch and brush of their lips that evening had been tame and gentle in the presence of his family, leaving them both hungry for more, it seemed, as he responded with just as much desperation. Edward groaned as they parted, resting his forehead against hers and panting breathlessly. I really shouldn't have had that last glass of champagne. Come on. Let's get you to bed, Bella answered with a chuckle, guiding him to the stairs and up to his room. She watched him collapse onto the bed and went about changing out of her dress and into a t-shirt from his drawer. I already know what one of my resolutions will be this year, Edward mumbled, and she turned her head to look over her shoulder at him questioningly. Never get so intoxicated again that I can't make love to my sexy girlfriend. Well, lesson learned, Bella replied with an amused smile. Making her way over to him and pulling off his shoes, he clumsily helped her remove the remainder of his clothing until he only remained in his boxers, and she covered him over before climbing into the bed beside him and hugging her body into his side. This is just as nice, though. Snuggling is as good as sex? I'll have to work on that, Edward joked, wrapping his arms around her and nuzzling her hair. What about you? Got any resolutions this year? Bella thought for a moment, watching her fingers trace along his shoulder and finally shaking her head. None that I can think of. I have everything I want for now, and can't imagine anything I'd wish to be different. What about you? Do you have any others besides that one? Edward nodded with his eyes closed. If I can't convince you to marry me, I'd like to at least have you living with me by the end of the year. Bella's head rose from his chest to look at him in surprise, but he never moved, a slow breath leaving him as he drifted off. She settled her cheek on his shoulder, yet sleep was the farthest thing from her whirling mind. It was obvious that she shouldn't have asked him that in his state of intoxication, but she'd honestly expected something more menial like a goal he'd set for his new job, or even going to church more often with his family. Nothing like that only 2 weeks into their relationship. Perhaps it wasn't quite as much of a stretch as she thought, since they'd already discussed buying a house and having children only days before, but it still knocked her off kilter. Those things had a someday attached to them. By the end of the year had such a definite tone. She knew she loved him and that he was it for her, so why did it still surprise her when he said things like that? If she could feel it so soon into their relationship, should it be that unbelievable that he might too? With a soft kiss to his jaw, Bella rested her head back onto his chest and nestled against his body as close as she could. The knowledge that she'd say yes to either or both of those questions from him was the last thing that passed her thoughts before she fell asleep in his arms. 3 weeks later, Edward sat on his couch attempting to read, yet he couldn't focus on a single printed word on the page. It was the first Saturday he'd spent without Bella, as she'd had to pull some overtime that day to catch up one of her assignments from that week. The departure of both Edward and Kate in very short sequence left the workload a little heavier than usual until replacements could be found, and Bella had taken a good portion of that on herself. His head turned to look out the front window when he heard a car pull into the driveway, hoping that maybe she'd finished early, and sighed when he spotted Emmett instead. The thumping knock of the man's fist sounded on the door, and Edward set his book on the coffee table, calling out, "Come in." "How do you know I'm not some psycho killer? You're really living on the edge now," Emmett said as he walked in and appeared in the living room doorway. "I saw you pull in, numbnut," Edward answered with a sigh, leaning his head back on the couch with his eyes closed. "So what's up? Get up, mopey dwarf. I'm dragging your scrawny ass out of here," Emmett replied, clapping his hands in encouragement. "It's time you socialized with people your own age that don't include your girlfriend. That rules you out," Edward muttered stubbornly, remaining stationary in his seat. Emmett folded his arms over his chest in defiance. "I'm only 2 years older than you. I wasn't just talking physical age, in maturity. I have decades on you," Edward replied, finally looking over to his cousin's husband. "Thanks, Emmett, but maybe another time. I'm waiting for Bella to get out of work." I don't think a few hours would kill either of you, and I already have these, so you're bound, Emmett countered, reaching into his pocket for 2 tickets and holding them out to him. Edward took the stiff slips of paper into his hand and pursed his lips sarcastically as he looked up to Emmett again. And here's my case proven. A cage match? Really? It's all the rage, Eduardo. Now get your ass off that couch and let's go, Emmett replied, gesturing over his shoulder with his thumb. Maybe 20 years ago, both the event and that statement, and I didn't even like it then, Edward groaned and tossed the tickets onto his book. And don't call me that. That's one I hate the most, and you know it. Emmett leaned forward with his hands resting on the arm of the couch and gazed at Edward determinedly. Look, I think Bella is amazing and I'm really happy for you both. And I get that this is all new and exciting and you want to be with her all the time. But she's working, Edward, and I'd really like to hang out with you for a while today. Edward sighed, rubbing his hands roughly over his face. It had been a while since he'd done anything with Emmett, and he was the closest thing to a brother he'd ever had. Pain in the ass that he might be at times, he was also one of his best friends, and he wasn't really asking for a lot. Alright, fine, just let me text Bella and we'll go. Now that's what I'm talking about, Emmett replied with a broad grin and rose to make his way to the door. Edward retrieved his phone from the end table and walked to the front closet to grab his coat, texting Bella as he locked up. Going out with Emmett for a bit. Text me when you finish up and I'll start heading home. We're taking my car, Emmett said as Edward moved in the direction of his own. No wussing out on me that way. Edward rolled his eyes and got into Emmett's car, gripping the armrest tightly as it peeled out of the driveway. Seriously, is that really necessary? Yep, Emmett answered simply as he sped down the street. Edward's phone rang and he glanced down, smiling at the sight of Bella's name, and quickly answering it. Hey, baby, are you done? Not even close. I'm going to be here for a while, Bella replied with a groan, and he sighed heavily. I'm sorry, honey, I miss you, but I've gotta have this done by Monday, and I really don't want to have to come back tomorrow, if I can possibly avoid it. It's my one day this week to only spend with you. I just needed to hear your voice for a minute before I interrupted your time with Emmett. I know I've been hogging all of it lately. The interruption would likely be a godsend. He's taking me to a cage match, Edward snarled, shooting Emmett a half glare, to which he was only met with a grin. Wow, sounds great, Bella replied uncertainly and followed with a brief laugh. Well, I hope you have fun. I should probably get back to work if I have any hope of getting out of here at anything resembling a reasonable hour. If I'm here too late, I'll see you in the morning. I love you. I love you. Just come over whenever, that's what the key is for, baby, Edward answered, and her chuckle filled his ear, ending their call with soft goodbyes. Damn, a key? Already? Emmett teased, wiggling his eyebrows at Edward. Okay, Emmett, I get it. You think it's all a bit much, but this is what feels right to us, Edward said and then thrust his head back against the seat with a groan. Shit, turn around. The tickets are still on my coffee table. Nah, they're not important, Emmett replied carelessly with his eyes focused on the road. They were just an alibi anyway, and I'll have you home long before Bella gets there, so don't worry about her seeing them either. You just made me lie to my girlfriend? What the hell is wrong with you? Edward exclaimed furiously. It wasn't a lie when you told it. Now was it? Emmett retorted with a triumphant look on his face. I knew damn well that if I told you where you were really going and you tried talking to Bella, you'd tie your tongue in a knot trying to get your story straight, and then you'd be so screwed. Would you mind letting me in on where we are going, then? Edward asked as he rubbed his forehead with his fingertips in an attempt to ward off the tension headache he felt coming on. We, my friend, are going to the one place no woman can know her man is going to. Edward's eyes widened and shot over to Emmett. Stop the car right this second if you are thinking about taking me to some strip club. Emmett shook his head and sighed sarcastically. Edward, you wouldn't be the only man here that would end up with his balls in a sling, if I even considered that. Besides, it doesn't seem like you are even close to being in need of anything outside the bedroom. Emmett, please don't start talking about my sex life and give me a simple answer to my question, Edward said in frustration. I'm taking you ring shopping. Edward groaned, covering his face with his hands and leaning back into the seat again. Not that the idea was abhorrent to him, but New Year's Day suddenly came rushing back to his mind. When he woke up that morning, Bella was beside him and wide awake, but something was different in her gaze. She seemed to be evaluating him, yet he couldn't figure out why. Once the aspirin and water had tempered enough of his hangover, he stepped into the shower and racked his brain for anything he might have done that would change her demeanor and cause her to look at him that way. They were both fully clothed, so he didn't think it could have been sloppy, drunken sex. She didn't seem angry or upset with him, just different. It wasn't until she slipped into the shower behind him, running her hands over his chest and pressing her lips to his shoulder blade, that what he might have said hit him. He groaned and pinched his eyes closed, vowing once more to never drink like that again. Emmett, I was drunk. We've barely been together for a little over a month, it's too soon. Let's just go back to the house. And we all know how alcohol has the marvelous effect on our filters, like stripping them away and making us brutally honest. You love the woman, right? You want to marry her? Emmett asked pointedly, and Edward nodded, clearing his throat. Then, excuse my French, but fuck the rulebook and do what your heart is telling you to. And obviously, you know exactly what that is in the back of your mind, if not the front of it as well. And I don't see her running and screaming away from you either. Nothing will ever top your dad asking your mom to marry him 12 hours after meeting her. And she said no, because she thought he was nuts, Edward exclaimed, waving his hands in front of him and looking back to Emmett. And yet 30 years later, here you sit with happily married parents as a product of that love, Emmett replied with a raised eyebrow. Miraculous, isn't it? Edward's stomach began tightening into a knot, and he drew a slow breath in an attempt to calm his nerves. He knew he wanted to marry Bella someday, and felt like a total putz over the fact that all the mystery and surprise had been taken out of it by his lack of restraint that night. And it was true that she hadn't pulled away from him or showed any less of a desire to be with him because of it, so obviously, she wasn't completely opposed to the idea. They wanted a future together, so did it really matter when it started? He exhaled gradually and nodded his head with a shrug. It wouldn't hurt to look. Part 2 is also available. Check out now.